killed them. Those 3 words hung in the storm-dark kitchen like a death sentence. Elena Ward stood trembling before the only man who had shown her kindness in 5 years, rain hammering the ranch house roof, lightning splitting the Montana sky, and finally, the truth she'd buried was clawing its way out. Caleb Mercer didn't move, didn't flinch, just held her gaze with those steady gray eyes while the woman he'd trusted with his home, his cattle, his carefully guarded heart, shattered completely in front of him. What happens when the past you've been running from catches up in the middle of nowhere? When the only person offering you redemption learns the terrible secret you swore you'd take to your grave? Stay with me until the end of this story. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see just how far Elena's journey travels. Because what happened next on that isolated frontier ranch would change 2 broken lives forever. The wagon lurched to a stop, sending a cloud of Montana dust spiraling into the cold October air. Elena Ward gripped the wooden seat edge, steadying herself as the driver, a grizzled man who'd spoken maybe 10 words during the 40-mile journey from Copper Falls, gestured toward the sprawling ranch ahead. "Ridgewater," he grunted. "Owner's expecting you." Elena stared at the weathered buildings scattered across the basin. A main house, solid but worn. Barn listing slightly to the east. Corrals stretching toward brown hills that rolled endlessly into a gray horizon. Everything looked tired, used up. Perfect, she thought. I'll fit right in. She climbed down, legs stiff from the ride, and retrieved her suitcase, a battered leather thing held together with rope and determination. The driver didn't offer to help, didn't wait for payment either. He just clicked his tongue at the horses and turned the wagon back toward civilization, leaving Elena standing alone in the wind. The ranch yard was quiet except for the distant lowing of cattle and the creak of a loose shutter somewhere. She scanned the buildings, looking for movement, for someone, for something to tell her what came next. Her fingers tightened around the suitcase handle. "You can do this," she told herself. "It's just another job, another temporary stop. Work hard. Keep your head down. Don't let anyone... You must be Elena Ward." She spun around. A man had emerged from the barn, tall, maybe 40, with the kind of build that came from years of physical labor. He wore canvas work pants, a faded blue shirt, and a Stetson that had seen better days. His face was weathered, lined by sun and wind, but his gray eyes were sharp, assessing. "Mr. Mercer?" Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "Caleb." He crossed the yard with an easy stride, extending a calloused hand. "No need for formalities out here." She shook it briefly, carefully. His grip was firm but not crushing. He didn't hold on too long, didn't let his gaze linger inappropriately. That alone made him unusual. "Thank you for the opportunity," she said, falling back on the script she'd used a dozen times before. "I promise I'll work hard. Won't cause any trouble." Something flickered across his expression. Amusement? Sadness? It vanished before she could identify it. "I'm sure you will." He nodded toward the house. "Come on, I'll show you where you'll be staying." Elena followed, hyper-aware of the space between them, of how isolated this place was, of every escape route and how few options she actually had if things went wrong. The house's back door opened into a mudroom cluttered with boots and work coats. Beyond that, a kitchen, large, functional, but clearly managed by someone who viewed cooking as fuel delivery rather than art. Dishes were stacked haphazardly. The stove needed cleaning. "Your room's upstairs," Caleb said, leading her through a parlor furnished with heavy, practical pieces. "Second door on the right. Bathroom's at the end of the hall. You'll share it with me, but I'm usually up and out before dawn, so shouldn't be an issue." He climbed the narrow staircase, and Elena followed, cataloging every detail. The house was solid, well built, but it carried the unmistakable air of a place where life had stopped being lived and started being merely survived. Caleb pushed open a door, revealing a small bedroom with an iron-frame bed, a dresser, and a window overlooking the front yard. Clean sheets, a quilt that looked handmade, and a kerosene lamp on the bedside table. "It's not much," he said. "It's fine." More than fine. She'd slept in far worse. He set her suitcase on the bed. "Kitchen's yours to manage however you see fit. Meals are simple. I'm not particular. There's a root cellar out back, chicken coop for eggs, Smokehouse for meat. Ranch hands eat in the bunkhouse, so it's just the two of us for meals most days. Elena nodded, filing away the information. You'll also help with general housekeeping, laundry, cleaning, mending. Beyond that, he paused, choosing his words. I might need help with other ranch work from time to time. Nothing you can't handle, but this isn't a job where you'll just be cooking and cleaning. I understand. Good. He moved toward the door, then stopped. Elena? She met his gaze. I don't know what brought you to Montana, and I'm not going to ask. Everyone's got a past. Out here, what matters is what you do now. His expression was unreadable. You work hard. You're honest with me. We won't have problems. Fair? Something tightened in her chest. Fair. After he left, Elena stood alone in the small room, listening to his boots descend the stairs, listening to the front door close, listening to the wind test the window frame. Slowly, she sank onto the bed. I don't know what brought you to Montana, and I'm not going to ask. If only it were that simple. Muds. The first week passed in a blur of work. Elena rose before dawn, started the stove, put coffee on, and began preparing breakfast while the house still held on to the night's chill. Caleb appeared exactly when he said he would, silent, efficient, accepting the plate of eggs and bacon with a nod before disappearing into the endless work that defined ranch life. She cleaned the kitchen top to bottom, scrubbed floors, washed windows, organized the chaotic pantry, tackled the mountain of laundry that had been piling up for what looked like months. Every task was a small battle won against the disorder that had crept into Ridgewater Ranch. The ranch hands, 3 men who lived in the bunkhouse, introduced themselves on the second day. Cole, the foreman, was a lean, weathered cowboy in his 50s with a dry sense of humor. Miguel was younger, serious, with careful hands and a gift for working with horses. And there was Danny, barely 20, eager and clumsy in the way of young men still learning their place in the world. They were polite, respectful, kept their distance. Elena preferred it that way. She learned the ranch's rhythm quickly. Caleb ran cattle, about 300 head spread across several thousand acres of grazing land. The work was relentless, mending fences, checking water sources, rotating herds, treating injuries and illness. Autumn meant preparing for winter, which meant cutting hay, stockpiling feed, reinforcing structures before snow made everything 10 times harder. On the 8th day, Caleb knocked on the kitchen doorframe as Elena was kneading bread dough. Need your help this afternoon, he said. She looked up, flour dusting her forearms. With what? Got a fence down in the north pasture. Cole's handling the south section, Miguel's shoeing horses, and Danny's, he grimaced. Danny's trying not to kill himself fixing the barn door. Could use another set of hands. Elena wiped her hands on her apron. I've never mended fence before. I'll teach you. An hour later, she sat beside him on the wagon bench as they rattled across open grassland toward a distant fence line. The sky stretched enormous and blue overhead, broken only by scattered clouds moving fast in the high wind. The land rolled in gentle swells, brown and gold, dotted with cattle that barely glanced up as they passed. Caleb drove with easy competence, one hand on the reins, gaze constantly scanning the terrain. He pointed out landmarks, a distinctive rock formation, a spring-fed creek, the boundary where his land met the neighboring ranch. That's the Peterson place, he said, nodding east. Good people. We help each other out during calving season. Elena studied the distant buildings. How long have you been here? Bought the ranch 12 years ago. His voice was matter-of-fact. Built it up from almost nothing. Had about 50 head of cattle and more debt than sense. And now? Now I've got 300 head and slightly less debt. A ghost of a smile touched his mouth. Progress. They reached the damaged fence, a section where a fallen cottonwood had crushed the wire and knocked over 2 posts. Caleb pulled the wagon to a stop and climbed down, immediately assessing the damage. Tree came down in that storm 3 nights ago, he said, running a hand along the splintered trunk. Lucky it didn't scatter the herd. Elena joined him, studying the tangled mess of wire and wood. What do we do? First, clear the tree, then reset the posts, then restring the wire. He grabbed an axe from the wagon bed and handed her a pair of heavy work gloves. You ever use an axe? A long time ago. Good enough. For the next 3 hours, they worked in companionable silence, broken only by the thunk of the axe biting into wood, the creak of posts being driven into hard ground, and Caleb's occasional instructions. Elena followed his lead, learning as she went, how to stretch wire taut, how to secure it properly, how to test the fence's integrity. The physical labor felt good, cleansing. Her muscles burned, sweat dampened her shirt despite the cool air, and her mind quieted in the way it only did when her body was fully occupied. Caleb worked with the steady, unhurried efficiency of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. But he was also patient when she struggled, quick to demonstrate when she didn't understand, generous with praise when she got something right. "You're a fast learner," he said as they secured the final strand of wire. Elena shrugged, uncomfortable with the compliment. "Just following instructions." "Most people can't even do that." He tested the fence, nodding in satisfaction. "This'll hold through winter." They loaded the tools back into the wagon. The sun was dropping toward the western hills, painting everything in long golden light. Caleb leaned against the wagon, pulling off his hat to wipe his forehead. "Can I ask you something?" he said. Elena's guard went up immediately. "Depends on the question. The letter you sent when you applied for the job. You said you had experience with ranch work, but you didn't say where. And you've got the calluses to prove it wasn't a lie." He studied her with those steady gray eyes. "But you also move like someone who's used to watching over their shoulder, like you're expecting trouble." Her heart kicked hard against her ribs. "I just prefer to be careful." "Careful's good. Out here, careful keeps you alive." He put his hat back on. "But there's a difference between careful and scared. And you, Elena Ward, strike me as someone who's spent a long time being scared of something." She met his gaze, weighing her options. She could deflect, change the subject, rebuild the walls she'd let slip during the afternoon's work. Instead, she heard herself say, "I've moved around a lot the past few years. Not all of those places were welcoming to women on their own. It wasn't the whole truth, but it wasn't entirely a lie either." Caleb nodded slowly. "Well, you don't need to be scared here. I meant what I said when you arrived. You work hard and you're honest with me. We won't have problems." He climbed onto the wagon bench. "And for what it's worth, I don't tolerate anyone mistreating my employees. You have trouble with Cole or Miguel or Danny. Hell, anyone. You tell me. Understood?" Something in Elena's chest loosened slightly. Understood. They drove back to the ranch house in comfortable silence as the sun sank lower and the temperature dropped. Cattle moved slowly across the darkening landscape, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. When they reached the barn, Caleb unhitched the horses while Elena unloaded the tools. As she headed toward the house, he called after her. "Elena?" She turned. "Thank you for the help today." His expression was sincere. "Made a difference." She nodded, not trusting her voice, and continued to the house. Later, as she prepared dinner, venison stew with vegetables from the root cellar, she replayed the afternoon in her mind. The easy rhythm of working alongside someone. The absence of judgment or prying questions. The simple, radical act of being treated like a competent adult rather than a charity case or a suspicious stranger. When Caleb came in for dinner, they ate at the kitchen table, the first time they'd shared a meal rather than him taking his plate elsewhere. He asked her opinion on whether they should plant a larger vegetable garden next spring. Mentioned that Cole had recommended hiring another ranch hand before winter set in fully. Talked about a possible trip to Copper Falls in 2 weeks for supplies. Normal conversation. Ordinary. For Elena, it felt like standing too close to a fire after years in the cold, simultaneously wonderful and terrifying. Because the closer she got to normal, the harder it would be when everything inevitably fell apart. The storm that would change everything arrived 2 weeks later. Elena had been at Ridgewater Ranch for almost a month. The kitchen gleamed. The house no longer carried the stale air of neglect. She'd established routines, learned the ranch's needs, and even started to sleep through the night, something she hadn't done in years. The weather had been building all day, bruised clouds rolling in from the northwest, wind picking up, the air carrying that electric charge that promised violence. By evening, the sky had turned the color of old bruises, and the first fat raindrops began to fall. Caleb came in early, checking supplies, making sure everything was secured. Going to be a rough one, he said, closing and latching shutters. These autumn storms can get mean. Elena had dinner ready, roast chicken, potatoes, bread she'd baked that morning. They ate quickly, both aware of the approaching fury. Lightning flickered in the windows. Thunder rolled across the plains, growing closer. "You okay with storms?" Caleb asked, noticing how still she'd gone. "I'm fine." The lie came automatically. She cleared the dishes while he checked the animals one last time, returning soaked to the skin despite his oilskin coat. He disappeared upstairs to change into dry clothes, and Elena finished washing up, trying to ignore the way her hands had started to shake. The storm hit with full force just after dark. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the ranch yard in stark white flashes. Thunder cracked so loud the windows rattled. Rain hammered the roof in sheets, and the wind howled around the house like something alive and hungry. Elena stood at the kitchen window, staring out at the chaos, and felt 5 years collapse in an instant. Different storm, different place, same helpless terror. "Elena?" She didn't hear Caleb enter the kitchen, didn't register his presence until his hand touched her shoulder lightly, and she spun around with a gasp, backing against the counter. He held up both hands immediately, stepping back. "Sorry. Didn't mean to startle you." Lightning flashed, thunder followed, and suddenly she was somewhere else entirely. A small house in Colorado. Flames reflected in windows, smoke thick enough to choke on. Screams she couldn't reach. "Elena!" Caleb's voice cut through the memory. She realized she was gripping the counter edge so hard her knuckles had gone white. Realized her breathing had gone shallow and fast. Realized she was shaking. I'm sorry." She forced herself to let go, to straighten up. "I just need—" Another lightning strike, this one close enough to light up the entire kitchen in blinding white. The thunder was instantaneous, deafening, and Elena broke. She slid down the cabinet to the floor, arms wrapped around her knees, gasping for air that wouldn't come. The storm roared outside, but all she could hear was the crackle of fire, the splintering of wood, the terrible silence that came after. Caleb dropped to one knee beside her, not touching, just present. Hey, you're okay. You're safe." "I can't." The words wouldn't form properly. "I can't breathe." "Yes, you can. Look at me." He waited until her wild eyes found his. "Breathe with me. In and out. That's it. Again. In and out." He counted breaths slow and steady until her gasping eased slightly, until the vice around her chest loosened enough to let air in. "That's good," he said quietly. "You're doing good." The storm raged on, but gradually Elena's awareness narrowed to the kitchen, to Caleb's calm presence, to the rhythm of breathing he was patiently maintaining. After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, she managed to speak. "I'm sorry." "Don't be." He settled more comfortably on the floor, back against the cabinet beside her, giving her space but staying close. "I get it. You don't? I do." He cut her off gently. "I've been where you are. Different cause maybe, but same place." Lightning flashed again, but this time Elena managed not to flinch. "War?" she asked, because that was the only thing she could imagine leaving scars like that. "Loss," he said simply. They sat in silence while the storm continued its assault. Eventually Caleb rose, moving to the stove where he put a kettle on for tea. He worked quietly, giving her time to pull herself back together. When he handed her a cup of something hot and herbal, she wrapped her hands around it, absorbing the warmth. "Thank you," she said. "Nothing to thank me for." He leaned against the counter, his own cup in hand. "You want to talk about it?" Every instinct screamed at her to say no, to rebuild the walls, to retreat to her room and pretend this hadn't happened. But something in the way he'd handled her panic, the calm competence, the absence of pity, the understanding in his eyes, made her consider the possibility that maybe she didn't have to carry this alone anymore. "It was a storm like this," she began, voice barely audible. 5 years ago, lightning struck the house. By the time I woke up, it was too late." Caleb didn't speak, just listened. I tried so hard to get to them, but the smoke, the fire, it moved so fast." Her hands tightened around the cup. "I got out. They didn't. Your family. It wasn't a question. My husband. My 2 children. Each word felt like pulling a knife from an old wound. Emma was 7. Michael was 4. The rain continued its relentless percussion on the roof. Lightning flickered, more distant now. The storm was moving on. I spent 2 years in that town afterward, just existing. Working whatever jobs I could get, drinking myself numb every night. Everyone knew. Everyone pitied me. Some people blamed me, said I should have done more, should have saved them. She laughed, a broken sound. Like I wasn't already telling myself that every second of every day. So you left. Eventually, couldn't stand the whispers anymore. The looks, moved to another town, then another. Worked ranches, farms, boarding houses. Never stayed longer than a few months. Never let anyone get close. She met his gaze. Until now. Caleb set his cup down. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight of its own pain. 7 years ago, I had a wife, Sarah. She was pregnant with our first child. We were fixing up this place, planning the future, arguing about baby names. Elena's breath caught. She went into labor early, complications. By the time we got her to Copper Falls, he paused, jaw tight. We lost them both, Sarah and our son. In one night, everything I'd built my life around just ended. I'm so sorry. I almost sold the ranch, almost walked away from everything, spent the better part of a year drunk and angry and convinced the universe had it out for me specifically. He looked around the kitchen. But the work kept pulling me back. Cattle need feeding. Fences need mending. The land doesn't care about your grief. It just keeps going, and eventually you realize you have to keep going with it. Or die. They sat with that truth between them. 2 people who'd been broken by loss and had somehow managed to keep breathing anyway. I still hear them sometimes, Elena confessed. Emma calling for me. Michael crying. I still smell the smoke. Still feel the heat. Some nights I wake up convinced I'm back in that burning house. Does it get better? Caleb asked. I don't know yet. She managed a weak smile. You? Some days yes, some days no. He considered his next words carefully. But having a reason to get up in the morning helps. Having work that matters. Having, he gestured vaguely. Purpose, I guess. The storm had faded to steady rain now. The immediate danger had passed, leaving only the cleansing aftermath. Elena realized something. For the first time in 5 years, she'd spoken about Emma and Michael without feeling like she was drowning. The pain was still there, sharp and real, but it hadn't destroyed her. And Caleb had shared his own wounds, making himself vulnerable in return. Maybe that was what survival looked like. Not forgetting, not moving on, just carrying the weight with someone who understood how heavy it was. You should get some rest, Caleb said gently. It's been a long night. Elena nodded, standing slowly. At the kitchen doorway, she turned back. Caleb? Yeah? Thank you for not treating me like I'm broken. His expression was kind. You're not broken, Elena. You're surviving. There's a difference. Mom, something shifted after that night. Elena still rose before dawn, still cooked and cleaned and managed the household with efficient precision. But now she also found herself accepting Caleb's invitations to help with ranch work more often. She learned to ride properly, not the tentative, nervous riding of someone afraid of horses, but the confident seat of someone who understood that the animal was a partner, not a vehicle. Miguel taught her how to approach skittish colts, how to read their body language, how to gentle them with patience rather than force. She helped with the cattle, riding out with Caleb to check on distant herds, learning to spot illness or injury, understanding the rhythms of ranch life in a way that went deeper than just cooking meals. The ranch hands noticed the change. Cole mentioned it one afternoon when Elena brought lunch out to where they were working on a new corral. Boss seems different lately, he said casually, accepting the basket of sandwiches. Lighter, somehow. Elena kept her expression neutral. Does he? Hasn't seen him smile this much in years. Cole's weathered face creased with approval. Whatever you're doing, keep doing it. She didn't know how to respond to that, so she just nodded and returned to the house. But she thought about it as she kneaded bread that afternoon. Thought about how Caleb had started lingering over breakfast instead of bolting his food, how he'd taken to discussing ranch decisions with her, valuing her input, how the house had started to feel less like a place to hide and more like something else, something she didn't dare name. Winter announced its approach with the first hard freeze. The landscape transformed overnight, grass stiff with frost, water troughs skimmed with ice, breath visible in the cold morning air. "Gonna need to bring the herd down from the high pastures soon," Caleb said one morning over coffee. "Weather's turning fast." Elena wrapped her hands around her cup. "How many trips will that take?" 3, maybe 4. It's hard work. Long days." He studied her. "You want to come along?" She met his gaze, saw the genuine question there. Not obligation, not pity, just the simple offer of partnership. "Yes," she said. They rode out 3 days later, Caleb, Elena, Cole, and Miguel, with Danny staying behind to manage the ranch. The high pastures were beautiful and brutal, rolling grasslands that climbed toward distant mountains, exposed to wind that cut like knives. The cattle were scattered across several square miles, and gathering them required patience, skill, and hours in the saddle. Elena's thighs screamed by midday, her hands were numb despite gloves, and her face felt wind-burned and raw. She loved it. There was something primal about working the land this way, about moving as part of a team, reading the cattle's behavior, anticipating their movements, about pushing through discomfort because the work mattered. They made camp that night in a sheltered draw, building a fire against the cold, cooking simple food, rolling into bedrolls under a sky absolutely brilliant with stars. Cole and Miguel fell asleep quickly, exhausted, but Elena lay awake watching the fire, listening to the cattle settling nearby, aware of Caleb doing the same across the flames. "Can't sleep?" he asked quietly. "Too much sky," she said. "Too many stars. Feels like I could fall up into them." He chuckled. "I know what you mean." Silence stretched comfortably between them. "Elena?" His voice was soft. "Back when you first arrived, you said you'd moved around a lot. Never stayed anywhere long." "That's right." "You planning to do the same here, stay a few months and then move on?" The question caught her off guard. She considered lying, considered deflecting, considered all the ways she could protect herself from the vulnerability of honest answer. Instead, she said, "I don't know anymore." She could feel his attention on her, though she kept her eyes on the fire. "For 5 years, leaving was the only thing I knew how to do," she continued. "Every time I started to feel comfortable somewhere, started to let my guard down, I'd panic and run. Because staying meant people would see the real me, the broken parts, the guilt, the grief. And I couldn't—" Her voice caught. "I couldn't stand the thought of anyone seeing that and looking at me the way people in Colorado did. Like I was something tragic, something ruined." "And here?" Caleb asked. Elena finally met his gaze across the fire. "Here, for the first time, I don't feel like I'm hiding. You know the worst of me, and you haven't looked at me any differently. The work is hard, but it's honest. The land doesn't judge. And you—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "You make me think maybe I don't have to keep running." The firelight played across Caleb's face, highlighting the weathered lines, the quiet strength in his expression. "I'm not going to lie to you, Elena. Building something, a life, a future out here is hard. The winters are brutal. The work never stops. You'll have days where you question every choice you've made." He fed another piece of wood to the fire. "But if you're willing to stay, to really commit to making this place your home, I'd like that. A lot." Her heart hammered against her ribs. "Why?" "Because you're the first person in 7 years who's made me remember what it feels like to want something more than just getting through the day. Because you work harder than anyone I've ever met. Because you understand loss without trying to fix it or explain it away." He smiled slightly. "And because the ranch hands say the food's never been better." Elena laughed despite herself, the sound surprising them both. "I can't promise I won't mess this up," she said honestly. "I've spent so long believing I don't deserve good things that I don't know how to accept them without waiting for them to be taken away." "Then we'll figure it out together." Caleb's voice was steady. "No promises except to be honest with each other. To keep showing up, even when it's hard. To build something that matters. Fair? The word echoed across the weeks since she'd arrived. Elena remembered standing in that small bedroom, hearing that same question, making that same agreement. Fair. Only now it meant something different, something deeper. Fair, she said. They stayed up talking while the fire burned low, about the ranch's future, about plans for spring, about small dreams cautiously voiced. When they finally sought their bedrolls, Elena lay staring up at that impossible sky, feeling something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. Dangerous, fragile, terrifying hope. They brought the last of the cattle down from the high pastures 3 days later, just ahead of the first real snowfall. Elena rode beside Caleb as they guided the herd through the ranch gates, her body aching but her spirit lighter than it had been in years. Danny had hot food waiting, and they all ate together in the main house, something that had become an unspoken tradition. Cole told exaggerated stories about past cattle drives. Miguel quietly mentioned he might propose to his sweetheart in Copper Falls. Danny asked endless questions about everything, and Elena, who had spent 5 years keeping the world at arm's length, found herself laughing and contributing and feeling like she belonged. After the ranch hands returned to the bunkhouse, Elena and Caleb cleaned up the kitchen together, another new routine that had developed organically. "Miguel's getting married," Caleb said, handing her a plate to dry. "Probably this spring." "That's wonderful." "It is." He was quiet for a moment. "Gets a man thinking, though." Elena's hand stilled. "About what?" Caleb set down the dish he was washing and turned to face her fully. "About the fact that I spent 7 years telling myself I was fine alone, that I didn't need anything except the ranch and the work, that opening myself up to caring about someone again was just inviting more pain." "Caleb, let me finish." He took a breath. "You showing up here, Elena, it wasn't something I planned for. Wasn't something I thought I wanted. But somewhere between that first day and now, you've become essential. Not just because you keep the household running, or because you're good at ranch work. Because you make me remember who I was before I lost Sarah. Because you challenge me. Because you see the parts of me I try to hide and don't flinch." Elena's throat had gone tight. "I'm not asking you for anything," he continued. "Not demanding a decision or putting pressure on you. I just needed you to know that if you're trying to figure out whether you belong here, the answer is yes, absolutely yes, for as long as you want to stay." She set down the towel, her hands trembling slightly. For so long, she'd believed she'd forfeited the right to this, to connection, to care, to someone looking at her like she mattered. "I spent 5 years punishing myself," she said quietly, "convinced that I didn't deserve happiness because I survived and they didn't. That moving forward meant forgetting them, betraying their memory. So I just existed, worked, moved, never let myself want anything. And now? Now I'm terrified." She met his eyes. "Because I'm starting to want things again. Want a home. Want to wake up in the same place every morning. Want to build something instead of just running away from the past. And wanting things means they can be taken away. And I don't know if I'm strong enough to survive that again." Caleb reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. When she didn't, he took her hand gently. "I can't promise you won't get hurt," he said. "Life's too unpredictable for that. But I can promise you this. Whatever comes, you won't face it alone. Not anymore. You're part of Ridgewater now. Part of this place, this life. And nothing, not the past, not fear, not anything, changes that unless you decide to walk away." Elena looked down at their joined hands, his calloused and scarred from years of hard work, hers marked by their own history of survival. Two broken people who'd somehow found their way to the same isolated ranch at exactly the right time. "I'm not walking away," she said, the words feeling like a vow. Caleb's expression transformed, relief and joy and something deeper flooding his features. "No? No." She squeezed his hand. "I'm staying. I'm going to help you run this ranch. I'm going to survive the winter and see what spring looks like here. I'm going to stop running and start living. She paused. If you'll have me. If I'll... He laughed, pulling her into an embrace that was careful and warm and absolutely right. Elena Ward, you just made me happier than I've been in 7 years. She held on to him, feeling the steady beat of his heart, feeling safe and seen and home. Outside, snow had begun to fall, the first real accumulation of the season. It would make the next months harder, but they'd face it together. Two survivors who'd chosen courage over fear, who'd chosen to build something new from the ashes of their pasts. When they finally pulled apart, Caleb kept his hands on her shoulders, his expression serious. One more thing, he said. What? When spring comes, when the ranch is thriving and we've proven we can make this work, he paused, clearly nervous. I'd like to court you properly. Do this right. Elena felt tears prick her eyes. Not from sadness, but from the overwhelming rightness of this moment. I'd like that, she said. They finished the dishes in comfortable silence, occasionally stealing glances at each other like teenagers with their first crush. When Elena finally climbed the stairs to her room, she stood at the window watching snow blanket the ranch yard, transforming everything into something clean and new. For the first time since the fire that had destroyed her family, Elena didn't feel like she was just surviving. She felt like she was living. And tomorrow, when she woke before dawn to start the day's work, she wouldn't be doing it alone. She'd be doing it as part of something bigger, a partnership, a future, a home she'd chosen instead of one she was hiding in. The past would always be part of her. Emma and Michael would always live in her heart. The guilt and grief would never fully disappear, but maybe, just maybe, that was okay. Maybe she could carry her losses and still move forward. Maybe she could honor her children's memory by refusing to let tragedy define the rest of her life. Maybe she could be both grieving and healing, both scarred and whole. Elena pulled the quilt around her shoulders, the handmade one that had been on the bed when she arrived, and settled in to watch the snow. Somewhere below, she heard Caleb banking the fire, heard his footsteps on the stairs, heard his door close gently. She smiled. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Winter was coming, and with it, the hardest months of ranch life. There would be storms and setbacks and moments of doubt. But for tonight, in this moment, Elena Ward was exactly where she needed to be. Home. Winter arrived with a vengeance that tested every promise Elena had made to herself. The morning after the first snowfall, she woke to a world transformed. Through her bedroom window, the ranch lay buried under 8 inches of pristine white that glittered in the early dawn light. Beautiful, deadly. The temperature had plummeted overnight, and when she descended to the kitchen, frost decorated the inside of the windows in delicate patterns. The stove had gone cold. Elena worked quickly to restart it, her breath forming clouds in the frigid air. By the time Caleb appeared, she had coffee brewing and was frying bacon, the kitchen slowly warming. Going to be a hard day, he said, accepting the coffee gratefully. His face was already weathered from the cold. He'd been out checking the animals before dawn. Lost 2 chickens overnight, froze despite the coop insulation. Need to move the cattle closer to the windbreaks before the next storm hits. When's that coming? Cole says tomorrow night, maybe sooner. He drained half the cup in one swallow. I need everyone working today, no exceptions. Elena nodded, already mentally cataloging what needed to be done. What do you need from me? Help Miguel bring hay down from the loft. The cattle are going to need extra feed to maintain body heat. After that, check all the water troughs. Make sure nothing's frozen solid. Then, he paused, studying her. You sure you're up for this? It's going to be brutal out there. She met his gaze steadily. I said I was staying. That means working, whatever it takes. Something warm flickered in his eyes. All right then, bundle up. We've got a long day ahead. The next 8 hours pushed Elena to her absolute limit. The hay bales were heavy and awkward, and hauling them down the loft ladder in bulky winter clothing was exhausting. Her arms screamed, her back ached, and sweat soaked her undershirt despite the freezing temperature. Miguel worked beside her with quiet efficiency, occasionally offering advice on lifting technique or taking the heavier bales himself when he noticed her struggling. You're tougher than you look, he said during a brief water break, his breath steaming in the barn's dim interior. Is that a compliment? From me? Yes. A rare smile crossed his serious face. Boss picked well when he hired you. They returned to work before she could respond, but his words warmed her more than the physical labor. By midday, they'd moved enough hay to last the herd through the coming storm. Elena's gloves were soaked through, her fingers numb, and exhaustion pulled at every muscle. But there was no time to rest. The water troughs needed attention. She found Caleb at the north pasture tank, using an axe to break through ice that had formed overnight. He swung with controlled power, shattering the frozen surface, clearing enough space for the cattle to drink. Here, Elena said, taking the axe from him. Let me. He looked ready to argue, then saw the determination in her expression and stepped back. All right, but watch your footing. Ice is treacherous. Elena positioned herself carefully and swung. The impact jarred her arms, sending shockwaves through already tired muscles. The ice cracked, but didn't break. She swung again and again. On the fourth strike, it gave way, and freezing water sloshed over the rim, soaking her boots. Good, Caleb said. 3 more troughs to go. They worked their way across the ranch, breaking ice, checking fences for damage, moving cattle to more sheltered areas. The sun crossed the sky without providing any warmth, and the wind picked up as afternoon wore on, cutting through layers of clothing like they were nothing. Cole joined them at the 4th trough, his weathered face grim. Storm's moving faster than expected. We've got maybe 6 hours before it hits. Caleb swore under his breath. The south herd? Danny's moving them now, but it's slow going. Snow's deeper down there. I'll go help him. Caleb turned to Elena. You head back to the house. Get warm. Get dry. Make sure we've got hot food and coffee ready. Everyone's going to need it. Elena wanted to argue, wanted to prove she could keep going, but she recognized the wisdom in his decision. She was exhausted, half frozen, and would be more useful preparing for the storm's arrival than collapsing in a pasture somewhere. Be careful, she said. Caleb's expression softened briefly. Always am. She trudged back through deepening snow, her body moving on pure determination. The house was blessedly warm. She'd banked the stove well before leaving that morning. Elena stripped off her wet outer layers, changed into dry clothes, and immediately began preparing for the long night ahead. She made 3 pots of stew, thick with beef, potatoes, carrots, and onions. Baked 4 loaves of bread, put on enough coffee to keep a small army awake, gathered extra blankets and laid them near the fire in case anyone needed warming. The wind had turned vicious by the time the men returned, howling around the house like a living thing. They stumbled in one by one. Miguel first, then Cole, then Danny, looking half-frozen and shell-shocked. Finally Caleb, his face raw from wind and cold, ice crusting his beard. Everyone accounted for? Elena asked, ladling stew into bowls. Everyone. Caleb's voice was rough. Cattle are as secure as we can make them. Now we wait out the storm. They ate in exhausted silence, too tired for conversation. Elena moved between them, refilling bowls, pouring coffee, making sure everyone had what they needed. When Cole tried to stand and nearly collapsed, she guided him to the sofa near the fire. Rest, she ordered. All of you, you've done everything you can. What about you? Miguel asked, noting the dark circles under her eyes. I'll rest when I'm sure everyone else is settled. Danny had already fallen asleep in one of the armchairs, his young face slack with exhaustion. Miguel and Cole weren't far behind, spreading out on the parlor floor with the extra blankets Elena had prepared. That left Elena and Caleb in the kitchen. He sat at the table, cradling a cup of coffee, staring at nothing. Elena recognized that look, the aftermath of pushing yourself past every limit, when your body was screaming for rest but your mind was still cataloging all the things that could go wrong. She pulled out the chair beside him and sat down. Talk to me. We did everything right, he said quietly. But nature doesn't care about that. If this storm is bad enough, we could still lose cattle, could lose more chickens, could have fences come down, roofs collapse, could wake up tomorrow to disaster despite all our preparations. Could, Elena agreed. Or you could wake up tomorrow and find that everything held, that your planning and hard work paid off, that you kept your ranch and your animals safe through another Montana winter. He looked at her then, really looked, and she saw the fear beneath his exhaustion. What if it's not enough? Then we deal with it, together. She covered his hand with hers. But torturing yourself with what-ifs tonight isn't going to change tomorrow's outcome. You need rest, Caleb. Your body needs it, even if your mind won't accept it. The wind shrieked outside, rattling windows. Snow hissed against the glass in driving sheets. "Come on," Elena said, standing and tugging him gently to his feet. "You're going to bed before you fall over." He was too tired to argue. She walked him upstairs, made sure he got to his room, then returned to the kitchen to bank the stove and prepare for her own rest. But sleep wouldn't come. Elena lay in her bed, listening to the storm's fury, listening to the house creak and groan under the assault. She thought about Caleb's question, what if it's not enough? It was the same question she'd asked herself 1,000 times over the past 5 years. What if everything you do, every effort you make, every promise you keep, still isn't enough to prevent disaster? She didn't have an answer. Maybe there wasn't one. All you could do was show up, do the work, and hope that was sufficient. Somewhere around midnight, unable to bear the isolation any longer, Elena rose and padded downstairs. The parlor was dark except for the dying fire. Cole snored softly in one corner. Miguel and Danny were silent lumps of blankets. She added wood to the fire, watching flames lick to life, casting dancing shadows across the room. The warmth was comforting, the normalcy of the task grounding. Couldn't sleep either? Elena turned to find Caleb on the stairs, fully dressed despite the hour. "Too much noise in my head," she admitted. He joined her by the fire, and they stood in comfortable silence, watching the flames, listening to the storm rage outside. "You know what I keep thinking about?" Caleb said eventually. 7 years ago, during Sarah's labor, I kept telling myself that if I just did everything right, got her to town fast enough, found the doctor, stayed strong, everything would be fine. I believed that hard work and determination could overcome anything. But it couldn't. No. His voice was flat. Sometimes you do everything right and still lose. That's the cruelest lesson life teaches. Elena understood that lesson intimately. So how do you keep going? How do you keep trying when you know that trying isn't always enough? Caleb was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his words were careful, considered. Because the alternative is giving up. And giving up means letting the worst moments of your life define everything that comes after. It means letting fear make all your decisions. He turned to face her. "You asked me once why I wanted you to stay. Part of it is this. You understand that life is hard and unfair and sometimes brutal, but you keep showing up anyway. That takes courage, I respect." "Or stupidity," Elena said, but there was no heat in it. Courage and stupidity often look the same from the outside. He smiled slightly. The difference is whether you're choosing it or having it forced on you. You chose to stay at Ridgewater, chose to stop running. That's courage, Elena. Pure courage. The fire crackled, sending up sparks. Outside, the wind howled its endless fury. "I'm terrified," Elena confessed. "Every day I wake up waiting for something to go wrong. Waiting for disaster to strike again. Waiting to prove that I don't deserve this. Any of this. And yet you keep getting up, keep working, keep building." Caleb's expression was gentle. "That's what makes you stronger than you think." They stayed by the fire until dawn began to gray the windows, talking in quiet voices about fear and loss and the stubborn human instinct to keep hoping despite everything. When the ranch hands began to stir, Elena returned to the kitchen to start breakfast, and Caleb went to check on the storm's damage. The news was better than expected. The cattle had survived, huddled together in the windbreaks. The barn roof held. The chicken coop lost 2 more birds, but the rest were fine. Fences were down in 3 places, but nothing catastrophic. The ranch had weathered the storm. "We got lucky," Cole said over breakfast, accepting a second helping of eggs. "Luck had nothing to do with it," Miguel countered. "We prepared, we worked, we secured everything that could be secured." "Both can be true," Caleb said. He caught Elena's eye across the table, and something warm passed between them, a shared understanding that sometimes you did everything right and still needed a little luck to push you over the finish line. The next week settled into a brutal but manageable rhythm. Storm followed storm, each one testing the ranch's defenses. Each one survived through preparation and sheer determination. Elena learned to read weather signs. The particular quality of light that preceded snow, the shift in wind direction that meant temperature drops, the behavior of animals sensing approaching danger. She worked alongside the men without complaint, earning their respect through action rather than words. Cole started asking her opinion on herd management. Miguel taught her advanced horse handling techniques. Even Danny, who'd been shy around her initially, began treating her as a fixture of ranch life rather than a temporary addition. And through it all, Elena's relationship with Caleb deepened in quiet, profound ways. They fell into patterns, morning coffee together before anyone else woke, evening conversations after dinner, stolen moments throughout the workday when their tasks aligned. He showed her his favorite places on the ranch, a hidden spring that never froze, a ridge where you could see for miles, a sheltered grove where wildflowers would bloom come spring. She told him stories about Emma and Michael, not the tragic ending, but the life they'd lived. Emma's obsession with collecting rocks, Michael's tendency to talk to every animal he encountered as if they were old friends, the time they'd tried to bake her a birthday cake and somehow ended up with something that resembled a geological formation more than food. Caleb listened to these stories with the careful attention of someone who understood their value. He didn't try to fix her grief or minimize it. He just listened. And somehow that was exactly what Elena needed. One particularly brutal January afternoon, Elena was in the barn organizing tack when she heard raised voices outside. She emerged to find Caleb and Cole in a heated discussion near the corral. "Can't afford to lose any more cattle," Cole was saying, his usual calm demeanor cracked. "We need to sell some of the herd now before spring, cut our losses." "And then what?" Caleb's voice was sharp. "We lose the breeding stock we need to rebuild? We decimate the herd and spend next year trying to recover? Better than going bankrupt trying to feed animals through the worst winter in a decade." Elena approached cautiously. Both men were clearly exhausted, nerves frayed by weeks of relentless work and worry. "What's going on?" she asked. Cole turned to her, frustration evident. "We're burning through hay faster than anticipated. At this rate, we'll run out before spring, which means either buying more, expensive, maybe impossible given the roads, or reducing the number of mouths to feed." "How many cattle would we need to sell?" Elena asked Caleb. 30, maybe 40 head, a quarter of the herd. "And if we buy more hay?" "If we can even find it, we're looking at prices triple the normal rate. It would wipe out most of our operating capital." Elena looked between them, recognizing the impossible choice they faced: sell cattle and damage the ranch's future, or gamble on expensive hay and risk financial ruin. "What about alternative feed sources?" she asked. "Is there anything else the cattle can eat? Anything we're not considering?" Caleb shook his head. "We've already maximized everything." "Wait," Miguel had approached unnoticed. "What about the Peterson place? Didn't they have a good hay harvest this year?" Cole snorted. "Frank Peterson? He'd charge us even more than the merchants in town." "Would he?" Elena asked. "You said they were good neighbors, that you help each other during calving season." Caleb's expression shifted, considering. "You're thinking we barter rather than buy." "I'm thinking we talk to them before making desperate decisions. Best case, they'll sell us hay at a fair price. Worst case, we're no worse off than we are now." Cole and Caleb exchanged glances. Finally, Caleb nodded. "It's worth a try. Cole, can you ride over there tomorrow? Take Danny with you in case the weather turns." "I'll go," Cole agreed, though his expression remained skeptical. After the foreman left, Caleb turned to Elena. "Thank you. I was too close to the problem to see other options." "That's what happens when you're exhausted and worried. You lose perspective." She touched his arm lightly. "You need to rest, Caleb. You're running yourself into the ground." "Can't rest when the ranch will be here tomorrow. But if you collapse from exhaustion, you won't be any use to it or anyone else." Her voice was firm. "Tonight, we're both going to eat a proper meal, and then you're going to sleep for 8 full hours. No arguments." To her surprise, he didn't argue, just nodded tiredly. "Yes, ma'am." That evening, Elena prepared Caleb's favorite meal: roast beef with gravy, mashed potatoes, fresh bread. They ate at the kitchen table, and she steered conversation away from ranch problems, asking instead about his life before Montana, about his family, about the dreams he'd had as a young man. "I wanted to be a teacher," he admitted, surprising her. "Had this idea that I'd educate frontier children, help build communities through learning. What changed? Reality. Realized I liked working with my hands more than books. Liked the independence of ranching, the direct connection between effort and result. He smiled slightly. Though sometimes I wonder what that other life would have been like. Do you regret it? No. Just curious. He studied her. What about you, before everything? What did you want? Elena considered the question. It had been so long since she'd thought about her own dreams, separate from survival. I wanted a garden, a real one, with vegetables and flowers and fruit trees. Wanted 2 canned preserves, bake pies from our own apples, have enough to share with neighbors. She laughed softly. Simple dreams. Nothing wrong with simple. No, she agreed. Nothing wrong at all. After dinner, Elena bullied Caleb upstairs to his room, ignoring his half-hearted protests about work that needed doing. She returned to the kitchen to clean up, then sat by the fire with mending, listening to the wind outside and the quiet sounds of the house settling. Cole returned the next afternoon with unexpected news. Frank Peterson would indeed sell them hay at only slightly above normal prices, and had offered to extend credit until spring when they could settle accounts. Said something about remembering when you helped him out after his barn burned 3 years back, Cole reported. Figured it was time to return the favor. Caleb's relief was palpable. We can make that work. How much can he spare? Enough to get us through March, maybe into April if we're careful. It was the first genuinely good news in weeks. That evening, Elena suggested they celebrate with a proper dessert, something beyond the utilitarian meals that had become standard. What did you have in mind? Caleb asked. Apple pie. I've been saving the last of the dried apples from the root cellar for something special. She enlisted Danny to help with the crust. The young man had surprising kitchen skills learned from his mother, while Miguel peeled apples and Caleb was banished from the kitchen entirely. You're too tall, Elena declared when he tried to help. You make the space feel crowded. Cole laughed from his position at the table. She just called you useless, boss. I noticed, Caleb said dryly, but his eyes were warm as they met Elena's. The pie emerged from the oven, golden and fragrant, filling the house with the scent of cinnamon and sugar. They ate it warm, gathered around the kitchen table, and for a few hours, the weight of winter's hardship lifted. Danny told stories about growing up on a small farm in Iowa. Miguel shared memories of his grandmother's cooking in Texas. Cole reminisced about cattle drives he'd worked in his youth, when the frontier was even wilder and less forgiving. And Elena, who had spent 5 years avoiding exactly this kind of intimacy, found herself laughing and contributing and feeling part of something larger than herself. Later, after the ranch hands had returned to the bunkhouse and the kitchen was cleaned, Elena found Caleb on the porch despite the cold. He stood looking out at the snow-covered landscape, breath steaming in the frigid air. You'll freeze out here, she said, joining him. Needed some air, needed to think. Elena waited, giving him space to organize his thoughts. I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop, he said finally. Keep expecting disaster because things have been going too well lately. The hay situation resolved, no major storms in the past week. The cattle are healthy, and you're here, making this place feel like a home instead of just a job site. That scares you. Terrifies me, he admitted. Last time I let myself believe things were good, I lost everything. Elena understood that fear intimately. The superstitious belief that happiness was a precursor to tragedy, that letting your guard down was an invitation for disaster to strike. I don't have any wisdom about this, she said honestly. I'm just as scared as you are. Maybe more because I've already proven I can survive losing everything once. I'm not sure I could do it again. So what do? We keep going anyway. She moved closer until they stood shoulder to shoulder. We choose to believe that maybe this time will be different, that maybe we've earned a little peace, that maybe the universe doesn't have it out for us specifically. Caleb turned to look at her, his expression serious. You really believe that? I'm trying to. She met his gaze. Some days are harder than others, but I'm trying. He reached for her hand, interlacing their fingers. The gesture was simple, natural, right. Then we'll try together, he said. They stood like that for a long moment, two people scarred by loss but still brave enough to reach for connection, until the cold drove them back inside. February arrived with the brief thaw that turned the ranch into a muddy nightmare, followed by a hard freeze that created treacherous conditions everywhere. Elena slipped on ice while carrying water to the chickens, wrenching her ankle badly enough that Caleb insisted she stay off it for 3 days. She was a terrible patient. "I can still do kitchen work," she argued from the sofa where he'd stationed her with her foot elevated. "You can rest," Caleb countered, bringing her tea. "Miguel's handling meals, Cole's managing the house. Danny's actually learning to cook something besides burned bacon. The ranch won't fall apart because you're sitting still for a few days." "But, Elena," his voice was gentle but firm, "let us take care of you for once. You've been taking care of everyone else since you arrived. Accept help." That was harder than any physical labor. Elena had spent so long being self-sufficient, refusing to need anyone, that accepting assistance felt like weakness. But as the days passed, and she watched the ranch hands awkwardly manage household tasks, watched Caleb check on her repeatedly with genuine concern, watched them all pull together to keep things running, something in her chest loosened. She didn't have to do everything alone anymore. On the third evening, Caleb brought dinner to the parlor on a tray. Miguel's attempt at stew, which was edible, if not inspired. "How's the ankle?" he asked, settling into the chair beside the sofa. "Better. Still sore, but I can put weight on it." "Good. Another day or two of rest, and you should be fine." They ate in comfortable silence. The fire crackled. Outside, wind moved through the bare trees with a sound like distant voices. "Caleb?" Elena set down her bowl. "Can I ask you something?" "Anything. When you lost Sarah, how long did it take before you could think about her without the pain being overwhelming?" His expression shifted, becoming distant. "Honestly, I'm not sure it ever stops being painful. It just becomes a different kind of pain. Less sharp, maybe. More like an old wound that aches when the weather changes." "Do you still love her?" "Yes." The answer was immediate, unflinching. "I'll always love her. She was my wife, the mother of my child, even though I never got to meet him. That doesn't just disappear." Elena nodded, understanding. "I still love my husband. Still love my children. Sometimes I feel guilty about that, like moving forward means I'm supposed to stop loving them." "That's not how love works." Caleb leaned forward, his expression earnest. "Love doesn't have a limited capacity. Caring about someone new doesn't diminish what you felt for the people you lost. It's not betrayal. It's just life continuing." "You really believe that?" "I have to, because otherwise—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Otherwise, what I'm starting to feel for you would be wrong. And it doesn't feel wrong, Elena. It feels like the first right thing I've felt in 7 years." Her breath caught. They'd been dancing around this for weeks, acknowledging attraction without naming it, building intimacy through shared work and conversation. But this was different. This was direct. "Caleb, You don't have to say anything," he interrupted gently. "I'm not asking for declarations or promises. I just needed you to know. Needed to be honest about where my heart is heading, even if I'm terrified of what that means." Elena looked at this man who'd given her a job when she had nothing, who'd created space for her grief without trying to fix it, who'd shown her through patient consistency that trust was possible again. "I'm falling for you too," she said quietly. "Have been for a while now. And it scares me to death because every time I've cared about someone, I've lost them. My brain keeps telling me that loving you is just setting myself up for more pain." "Maybe it is," Caleb acknowledged. "Or maybe we both deserve a chance at happiness despite our histories. Maybe we've earned the right to try. And if it goes wrong, then at least we tried. At least we chose courage over fear." He reached for her hand. "I can't promise you a fairy tale, Elena. What I can promise is honesty, partnership, and showing up every day to build something worth having. That enough for you?" It was such a Caleb answer, practical, grounded, real. No grand romantic gestures or impossible promises, just the steady commitment to try. Elena squeezed his hand. "It's enough. More than enough." They sat together as firelight played across the room and winter continued its assault outside. Two broken people choosing to believe they might build something whole together. Two survivors deciding that the past, however painful, didn't have to dictate the future. When Elena's ankle had healed enough for her to return to full work, she found the ranch transformed by subtle changes. Someone, almost certainly Caleb, had arranged the kitchen to make her tasks easier. Miguel had repaired the wobbly chair she'd been meaning to fix. Cole had organized the root cellar more efficiently. Danny had even attempted to bake bread, resulting in something that resembled a brick but showed genuine effort. They'd taken care of her space the way she'd been taking care of them. It was, Elena realized, what family looked like. Not the family you were born into, but the one you built through shared struggle and mutual support. The one you chose. Spring was still weeks away, winter still had teeth, but something fundamental had shifted at Ridgewater Ranch. They weren't just surviving anymore. They were building, planning, looking forward instead of simply enduring. And Elena Ward, who'd spent 5 years running from her past, had finally found a reason to stand still. March arrived with false promises of spring. The snow began to melt in earnest, revealing a landscape of brown grass and mud that seemed to stretch endlessly. The cattle, thin from the hard winter but alive, moved sluggishly across pastures still too frozen to provide decent grazing. Every morning brought new challenges. Calves born too early struggling to survive in the cold, fences damaged by freeze-thaw cycles, equipment that had seemed fine in autumn now revealing cracks and weaknesses that winter had exploited. Elena stood in the kitchen before dawn on the first day of March, watching pale light creep across the ranch yard, when she heard Caleb's footsteps on the stairs. His tread was heavier than usual, slower, and when he entered the kitchen, his face was drawn with exhaustion that went beyond physical tiredness. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked, already pouring coffee. "Nightmares." He accepted the cup, wrapping both hands around it as if seeking warmth that had nothing to do with temperature. "Haven't had them this bad in years." Elena knew better than to push. She cracked eggs into a skillet, added strips of bacon, worked with the quiet efficiency that had become second nature. Sometimes silence was the greatest kindness you could offer someone wrestling with demons they couldn't name. After several minutes, Caleb spoke. "It's always the same one. I'm riding across the ranch and everything looks fine, but when I get to the barn, it's burning. I can hear Sarah inside, calling for help, but no matter how fast I run, I can't reach the door, and I wake up knowing I failed her all over again." Elena set a plate in front of him, then pulled out the chair beside him rather than across. She didn't touch him, didn't offer platitudes, just sat close enough that he'd know he wasn't alone. "The fire wasn't in a barn," Caleb continued, staring at his untouched food. "It was in town, in a doctor's office, and it wasn't even a real fire. But my brain has decided that's not traumatic enough, so it rewrites history into something worse." He laughed bitterly. "Helpful." "My nightmares do the same thing," Elena said quietly. "In reality, I never made it past the front hallway before the smoke drove me back. But in my dreams, I get all the way to their bedroom door. I can hear Emma and Michael on the other side, so close I could touch them if I just push through. But my hands won't work, the door won't open, and I stand there screaming while they burn." Caleb finally looked at her. "Does anything help?" "Work. Staying busy, making sure I'm exhausted enough that sleep is too deep for dreams." She paused. "And lately, knowing I'm not alone in this house. That if I wake up terrified, there's someone who understands." Something passed between them then, a recognition that they were both still carrying wounds that hadn't fully healed, might never fully heal, but that bearing those wounds together made them slightly more bearable. "Eat," Elena said gently. "Then we'll face whatever today brings. Together." What today brought was Miguel hammering on the kitchen door 2 hours later, his face pale beneath his weathered tan. "Boss! We've got trouble in the south pasture. Bad trouble." Caleb was out the door before Elena could ask questions, but she followed quickly, pulling on her coat as she ran. They found Cole standing beside a section of fence that had completely collapsed, and beyond it, the churning waters of Ridgewater Creek swollen from snowmelt into a raging torrent that had jumped its banks. "Happened overnight," Cole said grimly. "The thaw upstream must have released a massive amount of water all at once. It took out the fence, washed away the bridge, and cut us off from the eastern grazing land." "How many cattle are trapped over there?" Caleb demanded. 40, maybe 50 head, and that's not the worst of it." Cole pointed downstream. "The Peterson place is directly in the flood path. If this water keeps rising, it'll take out their barn, maybe their house." Caleb swore viciously. "Danny, Ride to the Peterson place. Warn them what's coming. Miguel, see if we can rig a temporary crossing upstream where the current's not as strong. Cole, help me figure out if there's any way to divert this water before it gets worse." "What do you need from me?" Elena asked. Caleb turned to her, his expression torn between wanting to protect her and needing every available hand. "The cattle on this side. Make sure they don't panic and try to cross. If they go into that current, they'll drown. And check on the livestock closer to the house. If this flood spreads, we'll need to move them to higher ground." Elena nodded and headed toward the near pasture where the main herd clustered nervously, their instincts telling them something was wrong. She spent the next hour moving along the fence line, her presence and voice keeping them calm, preventing the kind of panicked stampede that could turn bad into catastrophic. The morning sun climbed higher, revealing the full scope of the disaster. What had been a manageable creek yesterday was now a raging river, brown with sediment, carrying debris, broken trees, fence posts, what looked like part of someone's shed. The roar of the water was constant, overwhelming, a reminder that nature didn't care about human plans or needs. Danny returned at a full gallop, his horse lathered and blowing. "Petersons are moving their animals now. Frank says he's got ropes and boards if we need them for a crossing." "Tell him we'll take any help he can spare," Caleb shouted over the water's roar. By midday, they'd managed to rig a precarious crossing upstream where the creek narrowed and the current, while still strong, was less likely to sweep away a full-grown steer. Miguel went across first, testing the makeshift bridge of ropes and planks, his horse picking each step with terrified precision. "It'll hold," he called back. "But not for long. This water's still rising." What followed was the most nerve-wracking work Elena had ever witnessed. Cole and Caleb worked in concert, guiding cattle one by one toward the crossing, keeping them calm enough to attempt the treacherous journey. Miguel waited on the far side, positioning himself to catch any animal that stumbled or panicked. Elena remained with the main herd, but her eyes kept returning to that fragile bridge, to Caleb standing knee-deep in rushing water, steadying frightened cattle as they crossed, risking his own life with each animal they saved. 20 cattle made it across safely, then 30. The water continued rising, now lapping at the bottom of the makeshift planks. On the 35th crossing, a young heifer panicked mid-bridge. She slipped, her hooves scrabbling for purchase on the wet wood, and for a terrible moment it looked like she'd go into the current. Caleb lunged forward without hesitation, grabbing her halter, using his own body weight to steady her until she found her footing again. Elena's heart stopped until both man and animal were safely across. Frank Peterson arrived with 3 of his ranch hands and additional rope, and between the 2 crews, they managed to get the remaining cattle to safety before the improvised bridge finally gave way. Planks and ropes swept downstream in the relentless current. "That was too close," Frank said, clapping Caleb on the shoulder. "But we got them all. That's what matters." Caleb looked like he'd aged 10 years in one day. His clothes were soaked, his face was gray with exhaustion, and he was shaking, whether from cold or adrenaline crash, Elena couldn't tell. "Come on," she said, taking his arm. "You need to get warm and dry before hypothermia sets in." He didn't argue, which told her exactly how close to his limit he was. Back at the house, Elena had him strip off his wet clothes in the mudroom while she started a bath, a luxury they rarely indulged in, but necessary now. She brought him hot coffee while he soaked, then clean, dry clothes that she'd warmed by the fire. "You scared me today," she said when he emerged, looking slightly more human. "Scared myself," he admitted. "That heifer slipped, and all I could think was how stupid it would be to drown saving a cow. But I couldn't just let her go." "I know, it's what makes you a good rancher." She pressed a cup of soup into his hands. "It's also what's going to give me gray hair before I'm 40. Despite everything, he smiled. "You'd look distinguished with gray hair. Flattery won't distract me from the fact that you nearly died this morning." "No, but maybe this will." He set down the soup and pulled her close, kissing her with a desperation that spoke of mortality and fear and the driving need to feel alive after coming so close to disaster. Elena kissed him back, pouring 5 years of loneliness and grief and the terrifying relief of his survival into the embrace. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, she pressed her forehead against his. "Don't do that to me again," she whispered. "I'll try. But you know I can't promise that." "I know." And that was the terrible truth of frontier life. Every day carried risks that could end in tragedy, and all you could do was face them together and hope luck held. The flood receded over the next week, leaving behind a transformed landscape. The creek had carved a new channel in places, leaving old routes dry. Fences needed complete rebuilding in the south pasture. The bridge was gone entirely and would require major construction to replace. The damage to the Peterson place had been less severe than feared, but their hay stores had been destroyed, which meant sharing Ridgewater's already stretched supplies. "We'll make it work," Caleb told Frank when the older rancher came to assess the damage. "You helped us through winter. We'll help you through spring." "Appreciate it, Caleb. Your father would be proud of the man you've become." After Frank left, Elena found Caleb standing alone near what remained of the old bridge, staring at the water that now flowed peacefully as if it had never threatened destruction. "Your father?" she asked. "Died when I was 19, left me with more dreams than money and a belief that the frontier was where a man could build something that mattered." His voice was distant. "Some days I wonder if he'd think I succeeded or just stubbornly refused to quit." "Those might be the same thing out here." He turned to look at her. "You ever think about what comes next? After we survive spring? After we get through another year? After we prove we can keep this ranch running?" "What do you mean?" "I mean long term. 5 years, 10 years. What does the future look like for Ridgewater Ranch?" He paused. "For us?" The question hung in the spring air, heavy with possibility and risk. Elena had spent so long living day to day, survival to survival, that thinking in terms of years felt almost dangerous. "I think," she said carefully, "that I'd like to see this place thrive. Not just survive, but actually prosper. I think I'd like to plant that garden I mentioned, vegetables and flowers, and maybe some fruit trees if the climate allows. I think I'd like to wake up 5 years from now and realize I've been in the same place, with the same people, building something permanent." "With me?" The question was quiet, vulnerable. "With you." She took his hand. "If you'll have me. If you think a woman with a past like mine is worth building a future with." Caleb pulled her close. "Elena, you're the strongest person I've ever met. You've survived things that would have broken most people. You work harder than anyone I know, and you make me believe that maybe the best parts of my life aren't behind me." He cupped her face gently. "So yes, I'll have you, for as long as you'll stay." "Then I guess we're doing this." "I guess we are." They stood together beside the remnants of the bridge, beside the creek that had nearly destroyed everything, and made the conscious decision to stop just surviving and start actually living. It was terrifying. It was exhilarating. It felt like standing at the edge of a cliff and choosing to believe you could fly. April brought the first real warmth, and with it, the backbreaking work of spring. Calves were born, requiring constant monitoring. Fields needed preparing for planting. Fences required mending after winter's damage. The ranch house itself needed repairs. Shingles replaced, shutters rehung, the root cellar cleaned and reorganized. Elena threw herself into the work with fierce determination, as if she could outrun her own fears through sheer physical effort. She worked from dawn until well past dark, falling into bed exhausted every night, too tired for nightmares or second-guessing. Caleb noticed, of course. "You're pushing too hard," he said one evening, finding her in the garden plot she'd started behind the house, still digging trenches for irrigation as the sun set. "I'm fine." "Elena." He took the shovel gently from her hands. "You've been working 14-hour days for 2 weeks straight. You're going to collapse." I said, "I'm fine." But her hands were shaking, and when she tried to take the shovel back, she nearly lost her balance. Caleb caught her, holding her steady. "Talk to me. What's really going on?" The dam broke. All the fear Elena had been outrunning came flooding out. "I keep waiting for something terrible to happen. We survived winter. We survived the flood. Things are actually good. And my brain keeps screaming that this is when disaster strikes. That I'm getting too comfortable, too happy, and the universe is going to punish me for daring to want things." "So you're exhausting yourself trying to prevent something that might not even happen. I know it's irrational. I know I'm being ridiculous. But I can't make it stop." She pulled away, wrapping her arms around herself. "Every night I lie awake cataloging all the things that could go wrong. Disease in the cattle, Another flood, fire, injury, and I think about how much it's going to hurt to lose this place, lose you, lose everything I've started to build here. Caleb was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "You want to know what I do when those thoughts come?" "What?" "I make lists of things I'm grateful for." "Sounds stupid, I know, but it helps. The cattle are healthy. That's something. We've got food stored for next winter. That's something. The ranch hands are good people who do solid work. That's something." He turned her to face him. "You're here, building a future with me. That's everything." Elena felt tears prick her eyes. "You make it sound simple." "It's not simple. It's a choice I make every single day. Choose gratitude over fear. Choose hope over despair. Choose to believe that maybe we've earned some peace." He wiped a tear from her cheek. "And some days I fail at that choice. Some days the fear wins. But I keep trying because the alternative is letting the past poison the present." She leaned into him, letting him hold her while the last light faded from the sky. "I'm tired, Caleb. Tired of being afraid. Tired of waiting for the other shoe to drop. Tired of not trusting that good things can last." "Then rest. Actually rest. Take tomorrow off from the heavy work. Sleep late. Read a book. Sit in the garden and do nothing productive." He kissed the top of her head. "Let the world keep turning without you for one day." It went against every instinct Elena had developed over the past 5 years, but she was so desperately tired, and Caleb's steady presence made her believe that maybe, just maybe, she could let go of the constant vigilance for a few hours. "Okay," she whispered. "One day." True to her word, Elena slept late the next morning, or what passed for late on a working ranch, which meant 6:30 instead of 4:30. She woke to sunlight streaming through her window and the sound of men's voices outside as the ranch work continued without her. The house was quiet. Caleb had left coffee on the stove and a note. "Took the crew to the north pasture, back by lunch. Rest. I mean it. See." Elena poured coffee and stood at the kitchen window, watching dust rise in the distance where the men worked. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to simply observe rather than plan or worry or prepare for disaster. The ranch looked beautiful in the morning light. The grass was greening up, new growth pushing through winter's brown. Wildflowers had begun to appear in patches, yellow and purple and white. The cattle moved peacefully across the landscape. Smoke rose from the bunkhouse chimney. This was her home now, not a temporary stopping point, not a place to hide. Home. The realization settled into her bones with quiet certainty. Somewhere between arriving with a battered suitcase and now, Ridgewater had become the place she belonged. These people had become her family. This man had become essential to her happiness. And yes, it could all be taken away. Life had taught her that terrible lesson, but it could also last. It could grow and deepen and become something permanent. She had to choose which possibility to believe in. Elena spent the morning in genuine rest, drinking coffee slowly, mending clothes at a relaxed pace, even napping in the afternoon sun on the porch. It felt strange, almost transgressive, to not be constantly productive, but it also felt necessary, like a wound finally getting air to heal. When Caleb returned at lunch, she had food ready but nothing elaborate. Just sandwiches and leftover pie, eaten at the kitchen table while he told her about the morning's work. "Cole thinks we might actually have a good calf crop this year," he said. "Better than we've seen in 5 years. And Miguel's been working with those young horses. They're coming along beautifully. Might be able to sell a few this fall for decent money." "That's wonderful." And it was. But more wonderful was the easy domesticity of sharing a meal, discussing plans, building a shared vision of the future. "How was your day of rest?" Caleb asked. "Harder than I expected. My brain kept trying to make me feel guilty for not working. But I'm learning, slowly, that I don't have to earn the right to exist through constant productivity." She smiled. "I even took a nap." "Scandalous." His eyes were warm. "I'm proud of you." The simple statement made something tight in Elena's chest loosen. When had anyone last said they were proud of her? When had she last done something worth being proud of that wasn't just survival? That evening, they sat together on the porch as the sun set in brilliant oranges and purples. Caleb had his arm around her shoulders, and Elena leaned into his warmth, feeling safe and settled and cautiously hopeful. I've been thinking, Caleb said, about what you said, about wanting a garden. It was just a dream. We've got more practical concerns right now. Dreams matter. And that plot you started behind the house, I think we should expand it, make it into something real. Vegetables for the house, maybe enough to sell in town. Flowers because they're beautiful, and you deserve beautiful things. He paused. Maybe even those fruit trees, if we can find hardy varieties that'll survive Montana winters. Elena turned to look at him. You're serious? Completely. This ranch needs to be more than just cattle and survival. It needs to be a place where good things grow, where we build something lasting. His expression was earnest. Where you can have the dreams you put aside 5 years ago. She kissed him then, pouring gratitude and love and hope into the gesture. When they pulled apart, both of them were smiling. Partners? She asked. Partners, he confirmed, in everything. May arrived with an explosion of life. The landscape transformed from brown to vibrant green almost overnight. Wildflowers carpeted the hills in riots of color. The cattle, fat on new grass, produced healthy calves that kicked and played in the pastures. Birds returned from wherever they'd wintered, filling the air with song. Elena's expanded garden began to take shape. With help from Miguel, who had surprising knowledge of cultivation, she plotted sections for vegetables, herbs, and flowers. Danny contributed labor, digging trenches and hauling compost. Even Cole got involved, building a fence to keep out deer and rabbits. And Caleb, true to his word, rode to Copper Falls and returned with 3 small fruit trees, apples that the nurseryman swore could survive Montana's climate. They'll take years to produce, the man had warned, but if you're patient, you'll have fruit. We've got time, Caleb had replied. They planted the trees together on a warm May afternoon, choosing a spot near the house where they'd be protected from the worst winds. Elena tamped soil around the first sapling, her hands gentle, her expression reverent. Emma loved apples, she said quietly, used to eat them until she made herself sick. Michael preferred them in pie, but Emma would eat them raw, core and all. It was the first time she'd mentioned her children without pain shadowing her voice. Caleb recognized the significance and stayed quiet, letting her continue. I used to imagine having an orchard, teaching them to climb the trees, making cider in the fall, canning preserves for winter. She sat back on her heels looking at the small tree. They'll never see this. Never taste fruit from these branches. No, Caleb agreed. But that doesn't make planting them wrong. It makes it a way to honor their memory, to create something living and good because they existed. Elena nodded slowly. I like that. Creating instead of just grieving. They planted the second tree in silence, working in concert, their movements synchronized from months of shared labor. The third tree went in just as the sun began its descent toward the western hills. There, Caleb said, standing back to survey their work. In 5 years, maybe we'll have our first apples. 5 years, Elena tested the words. You really think we'll still be here in 5 years? I think we'll be here in 50 years, he said, if the world's fair and we're lucky. And I think these trees will outlive us both, growing fruit for people we'll never meet. It was a frontier perspective, planting for future generations, building something that extended beyond your own lifetime. Elena found it oddly comforting, this idea that their efforts would ripple forward into a future they couldn't see. As spring deepened towards summer, a new pattern emerged. Once a week, on Sunday afternoons when the most urgent work was done, Elena and Caleb would walk the ranch together, not to check fences or inspect cattle, but simply to appreciate what they were building. During these walks, they talked about everything and nothing, their childhoods, their dreams, their fears, their hopes. Elena told stories about her life before Colorado, before the fire, when the future had seemed simple and achievable. Caleb shared memories of his father, of learning ranch work, of the young man he'd been before loss taught him harder lessons. And slowly, carefully, they began to talk about the future in concrete terms. I'd like to hire another hand next year, Caleb said during one walk. Someone young we can train up. Cole's not getting any younger, and it'd be good to have someone learning the work. What about expanding the herd? Elena asked. We've got the grazing land. Maybe, but I'm thinking more about diversifying. Horses, like Miguel suggested, they require less grazing land, fetch better prices, And we've got someone who knows how to work with them. They discuss these plans like people who expected to see them realized, like people building a life, not just surviving day to day. On a particularly beautiful Sunday in late May, they climbed to the ridge that overlooked the entire ranch. The view was spectacular. Rolling grassland, the creek now flowing peacefully, the ranch buildings looking solid and permanent, cattle dotting the landscape like brushstrokes on a painting. "This is what I wanted," Caleb said quietly. "When I bought this place 12 years ago, half broke and completely naive, this is what I saw in my mind. Not just surviving, but thriving. Creating something permanent in a world that's constantly changing." "You've done it," Elena said. "Look what you've built." "We've built," he corrected. "This place was just existing before you came. Now it's becoming what it was always supposed to be." Elena leaned against him, watching the sun paint the landscape in gold. "I need to tell you something." "All right. I'm happy." The words felt strange in her mouth, almost forbidden. "For the first time in 5 years, I'm genuinely happy. Not just content or managing or surviving, actually happy. And it terrifies me." Caleb wrapped his arm around her. "Why does it terrify you?" "Because happiness feels like tempting fate, like standing on top of a hill during a thunderstorm, like I'm daring the universe to notice me and take it all away." "Or," Caleb offered, "happiness is exactly what you deserve after 5 years of suffering. Maybe it's not a setup for tragedy. Maybe it's just the natural result of hard work, good choices, and a little bit of grace." "You really believe that?" "I'm learning to, same as you." He turned her to face him. "Elena, I love you. I've probably loved you since you stood in my kitchen during that storm and trusted me enough to tell the truth about your past. I know I should probably wait, should court you properly like I promised, but I need you to know. You make me believe in futures again. You make me want to build something lasting. You make me happy." Her breath caught. No one had said those words to her in so long. "I love you too. I've been afraid to admit it, afraid saying it out loud would jinx everything, but I do. I love your steadiness and your strength and the way you see the best in people. I love the life we're building together." They kissed on that ridge as the sun set over Ridgewater Ranch, two people who'd been broken by loss but had found wholeness in each other. Two survivors who'd chosen to believe that tragedy didn't have to be the end of the story. When they finally pulled apart, Caleb's expression was serious. "I want to marry you, Elena. Not today. Not even this year necessarily. But when you're ready, when you feel certain about this, I want you to be my wife. I want to build this ranch together officially. I want whatever future comes to be ours, not just mine or yours." Elena's heart hammered. Marriage, permanence, a complete commitment to this new life. Everything her scared brain had been telling her was impossible. "Ask me again at harvest time," she said. "When we've survived a full year together. When I've proven to myself that this is real and lasting. When I can say yes without the fear drowning out everything else." "Harvest time," Caleb agreed. "I can wait until then. I can wait as long as you need." They descended from the ridge as stars began to appear in the deepening blue sky, walking hand in hand back toward the ranch house where lamplight glowed warm and welcoming. Tomorrow would bring more work, more challenges, more opportunities to doubt or fear or retreat into old protective patterns. But tonight, Elena let herself believe in the future. Let herself imagine harvest time, and a question answered with certainty instead of fear. Let herself hope that maybe, finally, she'd found where she belonged. Summer descended on Ridgewater with a heat that transformed the ranch yet again. The morning air carried the scent of wild sage and sun-warmed grass, and the work shifted from surviving to thriving. Elena's garden exploded with growth, tomatoes climbing their stakes, beans winding up poles, lettuce and carrots pushing through rich soil. She worked among the plants in the early mornings before the heat became unbearable, and found a peace there she'd never expected. The ranch hands had noticed the change in both her and Caleb, though they were too polite to mention it directly. But Cole's knowing smiles and Miguel's quiet approval spoke volumes. Even Danny, usually oblivious to anything beyond horses and food, had commented that the boss seemed lighter somehow. "Like he's been carrying a heavy pack for years and finally set it down," the young man had said, while helping Elena weed the garden one morning. Maybe we both have, Elena replied, pulling up a stubborn thistle. It was during one of these peaceful morning garden sessions in late June that Elena heard an unfamiliar wagon approaching. She stood, shading her eyes against the already bright sun, and watched as a well-dressed woman driving a small buggy pulled into the ranch yard. The visitor was perhaps 50, with iron-gray hair pulled into a severe bun, and clothing that spoke of town life rather than frontier practicality. She climbed down from the buggy with surprising grace and looked around the ranch with sharp, assessing eyes. Elena wiped dirt from her hands and approached cautiously. "Can I help you?" "I'm looking for Caleb Mercer," the woman said. Her voice was cultured, educated, carrying an accent that wasn't local. "I was told I'd find him here." "He's out checking the north herd. Should be back within the hour." Elena gestured toward the house. "You're welcome to wait inside, out of this heat. I can get you some water." The woman studied Elena with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. "And you are?" "Elena Ward. I manage the household here." "I see." Something flickered across the woman's face. Disapproval? Assessment? "I'm Catherine Mercer, Caleb's aunt." Elena's stomach dropped. Caleb had mentioned his father, but never his mother's family, never an aunt. The omission suddenly felt significant. "Please, come inside," Elena said, recovering her composure. "I'm sure Caleb will be pleased to see you." Catherine followed her into the house, and Elena was suddenly acutely aware of how the kitchen looked, functional but worn, showing signs of hard use despite her best efforts to keep it clean. Catherine's gaze swept across every surface, taking in the cast-iron stove, the scarred wooden table, the simple furnishings that defined frontier life. "You've kept the place reasonably well," Catherine said, as if conferring a great compliment. "When I heard Caleb had hired a housekeeper, I had concerns about what I might find." Elena poured water from the pitcher, keeping her expression neutral. "The ranch keeps us all busy. There's not much time for anything beyond the essentials." "Indeed." Catherine accepted the water but didn't drink. "How long have you been working here, Miss Ward?" "Since last October." "Nearly 9 months, then." Catherine's tone was mild, but her eyes were calculating. "And in that time you've become quite settled, I imagine." There was something beneath the words, some implication Elena couldn't quite grasp. She was saved from having to respond by the sound of horses outside. Through the window, she saw Caleb dismounting, Cole beside him. They were laughing about something, relaxed in the way men were after a successful morning's work. Then Caleb looked toward the buggy, and his entire body went rigid. He entered the kitchen moments later, his expression carefully controlled. "Aunt Catherine, this is unexpected." "Caleb." Catherine stood, and for a moment Elena thought she might embrace him, but instead she merely nodded. "You look well. Frontier life agrees with you. What brings you to Montana?" His voice was polite but cool. "I wasn't aware you'd left Philadelphia. Your cousin Margaret is getting married in September. I came to extend the invitation personally." Catherine's gaze slid to Elena. "And to see how you were managing out here in this wilderness." "I'm managing fine, as you can see." The tension in the room was thick enough to cut. Elena moved toward the door. "I should check on—" "Please stay, Elena," Caleb said firmly. "Anything my aunt has to say can be said in front of you." Catherine's eyebrows rose slightly. "I see. Well then." She turned her full attention to Caleb. "I won't pretend this is purely a social visit. Your mother, my sister, would want me to ensure you're not making decisions you'll regret." "My mother has been dead for 20 years, Caleb said flatly. "I doubt she has opinions about my current life." "Don't be flippant. You know what I mean." Catherine gestured around the kitchen. "This place, this life, it's so far removed from what you could have had. Your father filled your head with romantic notions about the frontier, and look where it led. You buried one wife already. I'd hate to see you make the same mistake twice." Elena felt like she'd been struck. The casual cruelty of the statement, the dismissal of Sarah's death as a mistake, made her hands clench into fists. Caleb's voice, when he spoke, was dangerously quiet. "You need to leave." "I'm only thinking of your welfare." "No. You're thinking about the embarrassment of having a nephew who chose ranching over Philadelphia society. You never approved of my father, never approved of this life, and you certainly never approved of Sarah." He moved toward the door, holding it open. I appreciate you bringing the invitation. I'll consider attending Margaret's wedding, but right now I'd like you to go. Catherine drew herself up with icy dignity. Very well, but I hope you'll reconsider your choices before it's too late. This woman, she glanced at Elena with barely concealed disdain. She's not suitable for the life you deserve. Get out! Caleb's voice was steel. Now! After Catherine's buggy had disappeared down the road, Elena stood frozen in the kitchen, her mind replaying the encounter. Not suitable. The words echoed with all her own fears, all her own doubts about whether she deserved the life she was building here. Caleb returned to the kitchen, his face flushed with anger. I'm sorry you had to hear that. My aunt has always been… He struggled for words. She believes the only worthwhile life is the one she chose. Everything else is beneath consideration. Is it true? Elena asked quietly. About your father and the frontier? Caleb sighed, pulling out a chair and sitting heavily. My father grew up in Philadelphia society. Wealthy family, important connections, all the opportunities a young man could want. And he hated every minute of it. When he was 25, he walked away from all of it, the money, the prestige, the comfortable future, and came west. Met my mother in a small town in Wyoming. She was a teacher, daughter of a shopkeeper, completely unsuitable by his family's standards. They disowned him? Essentially. His parents made token contact when I was born, but my mother's family, Catherine especially, never forgave him for what they saw as throwing his life away. Caleb's expression was distant. He used to tell me that the best decision he ever made was choosing authenticity over comfort. That building something with his own hands meant more than inheriting something built by others. And you believed him. I lived it, watched him work this land, build this ranch from nothing, create a life that mattered to him. Caleb met her gaze. Then I watched him die at 52, worn out from hard work and harsh weather, and I still wouldn't trade what he taught me for all of Philadelphia's comfort. Elena absorbed this, understanding him better now. Catherine thinks I'm like your father's choice. Unsuitable. Beneath you. Catherine thinks anyone who isn't from her social circle is beneath consideration. He reached across the table, taking her hand. But you're nothing like that equation. You're not a choice between comfort and hardship. You're the best thing that's happened to this ranch, to me, in 7 years. And what my aunt thinks doesn't matter. But it did matter, at least to Elena, because Catherine had given voice to the fears that still woke her at 3 a.m, that she was bringing Caleb down, that he deserved better, that her damaged past made her unsuitable for the future he was offering. The encounter cast a shadow over the following weeks. Elena tried to shake it off, tried to focus on the work and the life they were building, but Catherine's words had burrowed deep. She found herself watching Caleb more critically, wondering if he sometimes regretted his choices, if he looked at her and saw all the ways she fell short of what his life could have been. One evening in mid-July, as they sat on the porch after dinner, Caleb finally confronted the distance that had grown between them. You've been different since Catherine's visit, he said. Quieter, more guarded. Elena wanted to deny it, but she was tired of hiding. She made me think about things I'd been avoiding. Like what? Like whether I'm good enough for you, whether you're settling because the frontier has limited options. She rushed on before he could interrupt. You could have gone back to Philadelphia after Sarah died, could have had an easier life, married someone from your own background, lived in comfort. Instead, you're here, with me, someone who brings nothing but a past full of tragedy and guilt. Caleb was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was measured. Do you remember what I told you about my father? About choosing authenticity over comfort? Yes. That's what this is, not settling, choosing. He turned to face her fully. I could have gone back to Philadelphia. Could have lived the life Catherine wanted for me. And I would have been miserable every single day, surrounded by people who valued appearances over substance, comfort over meaning, inherited wealth over earned achievement. But I'm not finished. His tone was gentle but firm. You think you bring nothing but tragedy? Elena, you bring strength I've never seen in anyone else. You bring honesty about pain instead of polite pretense. You bring genuine partnership instead of society-mandated roles. You bring the courage to keep building even when you're terrified everything will collapse. That's just survival. Anyone would. No, not anyone. Most people would have stayed broken. You chose to heal. He took her hand. And you're not taking me down or holding me back. You're lifting me up, making me remember why this life matters, making this ranch feel like a home instead of just a job site. Elena felt tears threatening. You really believe that? I know it. The same way I know that my father was happier breaking his back on frontier land with my mother than he ever would have been in a Philadelphia mansion with a suitable wife. Caleb's expression was earnest. Catherine represents a life I actively rejected. Her opinion of you, of us, of this life, it's completely irrelevant to me. The only opinion that matters is yours. Do you want this life? Do you want to build this future with me? Did she? Elena looked out at the ranch, at the garden she'd planted, at the buildings she'd helped maintain, at the land she'd learned to read and respect. She thought about the work that still scared her, the vulnerability that still felt dangerous, the future that still seemed impossibly fragile. And then she thought about the alternative, leaving, starting over somewhere new, running again, never knowing if she could have made this work, if she could have been brave enough to claim happiness instead of just surviving. I want this, she said quietly. Want you. Want the life we're building. I'm just afraid I'll wake up one day and discover it was all too good to be true. Then we'll face that fear together, every day if we have to. Caleb pulled her close. But I'm betting that one day you'll wake up and realize you've stopped waiting for disaster, that you've started believing this is real and lasting, and that'll be the day you're finally free of the past. They sat together as the summer evening deepened around them, cicadas singing their endless chorus, stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Elena let herself lean into Caleb's warmth, let herself imagine a future where Catherine's words held no power, where the past was just history instead of a constant threat. August arrived with a vengeance, bringing heat that shimmered off the plains and turned afternoon work into an endurance test. The cattle sought shade wherever they could find it, and the ranch hands started their days even earlier to finish before the worst heat hit. Elena's garden, carefully tended and well-watered, produced abundance. Tomatoes ripened faster than they could eat them, forcing her to learn canning. Beans needed picking every other day. The lettuce had bolted in the heat, but squash and cucumbers thrived. She found unexpected joy in preserving the harvest. There was something deeply satisfying about rows of glass jars filled with tomatoes, pickles, and beans. Tangible proof of work rewarded, security created with her own hands. Each jar represented winter meals, represented provision, represented the kind of future thinking that came with permanence. Miguel's sweetheart arrived in early August, a quiet woman named Rosa, who looked at Miguel like he'd hung the stars personally. They married in a simple ceremony at the Peterson Ranch, with both crews in attendance. Elena helped Rosa prepare for the wedding and found herself unexpectedly emotional watching them exchange vows. You're thinking about harvest time, Caleb said quietly, standing beside her during the ceremony. How did you know? Because I am too. After the wedding, as they rode back to Ridgewater in the wagon, Caleb asked, Do you still need until harvest, or have you already decided? Elena considered the question honestly. She had decided, really. Had decided weeks ago, maybe even months ago. The waiting wasn't about uncertainty anymore. It was about proving to herself that she could sustain happiness, that she wouldn't sabotage it through fear or doubt. I've decided, she admitted, but I still want to wait, want to make it through a full year, want to prove I can keep the promises I'm making. Promises? To stay, to build, to choose this life every day instead of running when it gets hard. She met his gaze. I need to prove to myself that I'm strong enough before I ask you to bet your future on me. Caleb's expression was soft. Elena, I already have bet my future on you. The waiting is just formality at this point. Then humor me. Let me have this last test. All right, harvest it is. The weeks that followed were some of the best of Elena's life. The work was hard but rewarding. The ranch thrived under their combined efforts. Cole mentioned that he'd never seen Caleb this content, and even Catherine's poison seemed to have faded into insignificance. But September brought unexpected challenges. The first came in the form of a letter delivered by the mail rider, official correspondence from a law office in Colorado. Elena's hands shook as she opened it, Caleb standing beside her in silent support. The letter was brief and formal. The bank that had held the mortgage on her old property was finally settling accounts. As the sole survivor of the fire, Elena was entitled to a small settlement, not much, but enough to represent closure on that chapter of her life. "They want me to come sign papers," she said, her voice hollow. "In Colorado. In the town I left 5 years ago." Caleb read over her shoulder. "You don't have to go. You could sign papers by proxy." "No." Elena set the letter down with shaking hands. "I need to go, need to face it. The town, the memories, all of it. If I'm really going to move forward, I can't keep running from the past." "Then I'm coming with you." "Caleb, you can't leave the ranch. Cole can manage for a week. Danny and Miguel can handle the work. You're not doing this alone." His tone left no room for argument. "When do we need to leave?" They departed 3 days later, taking the train from Copper Falls south into Colorado. Elena grew quieter as they traveled, retreating into herself in a way Caleb hadn't seen since her early days at Ridgewater. He didn't push, just stayed close, a steady presence as miles disappeared beneath them. The town of Millerville hadn't changed much. Same dusty streets, same buildings, same people going about their lives. But everything looked smaller to Elena now, less significant, as if distance and time had shrunk it to manageable proportions. They checked into the hotel, the same hotel where Elena had lived for 2 years after the fire, drinking herself numb every night. The owner recognized her immediately. "Miss Ward, we heard you'd moved on." The woman's expression was carefully neutral. "Here on business?" "Just to settle some legal matters. We'll only be a few days." In their room, Elena stood at the window, looking down at Main Street, her body rigid with tension. "We can leave," Caleb offered. "Handle this by mail. You don't owe this town anything." "No, I need to do this." She turned to face him. "But I need you to understand something. The woman I was here, she was barely surviving, broken and angry and drowning in guilt. Everyone in this town remembers her, sees me as that tragic figure. Let them. You know who you are now. That's what matters." The next morning, they met with the lawyer, a kind-faced man who handled the paperwork efficiently and with minimal fuss. The settlement wasn't large, but it represented everything Elena had left behind. The lawyer mentioned that the land had been sold, the ruins of the house cleared away, a new family building on the site. "They have 2 young children," he said, "built a good solid house. The place has life again." Elena absorbed this. Her tragedy had been erased, replaced by someone else's future. It should have hurt, but instead it felt right, like the land was meant for living, not for serving as a memorial to loss. After the meeting, they walked through town. Elena showed Caleb the boarding house where she'd lived before the fire, the general store where she'd bought groceries, the small house on the edge of town that had once held everything she loved. Except it wasn't there anymore, just an empty lot with fresh grass growing, and beyond it, a new house with a swing hanging from a tree and children's toys scattered in the yard. Elena stood at the edge of the property, staring at the place where her family had died. Caleb stood beside her, waiting. "I thought it would hurt more," she said finally, seeing it replaced. "But it just feels like time passing, like the world moving on the way it's supposed to." A woman emerged from the new house, young, maybe 30, with a toddler on her hip. She saw them and waved hesitantly. "Can I help you folks?" Elena almost walked away, almost retreated into the safety of anonymity. But then she made a choice, the brave choice, the hard choice. "I used to live here," she said. "Before. I just wanted to see the place one last time." Recognition dawned in the woman's eyes. "You're Elena Ward, the one who—" She stopped, seeming to realize how that sentence should end. "I'm sorry. That must have been terrible." "It was, but I survived." Elena glanced at the house, at the toys, at the life blooming on land that had once held her greatest sorrow. "You've built something beautiful here. I hope it brings you and your family happiness." "Thank you." The woman shifted the toddler to her other hip. "Would you like to come in? See the house?" It was a generous offer, and Elena knew it came from genuine kindness. But she shook her head. No, that's your home now, your future. I've got my own to build. She took Caleb's hand. But thank you for making something good grow here. As they walked back toward town, Caleb asked, How are you feeling? Lighter, Elena said, surprised by the truth of it. I've been carrying this place like a weight around my neck, but seeing it transformed, seeing life there again, doesn't belong to my grief anymore. Belongs to their future. They spent one more night in Millerville, and in the evening, Elena insisted on visiting the small cemetery at the edge of town. Caleb waited by the gate while she approached 3 simple headstones. She stood there for a long time, looking at the names carved in granite. Thomas Ward, Emma Ward, Michael Ward. Her family, reduced to dates and stone. I'm getting married, she told them quietly, to a good man named Caleb. He owns a ranch in Montana. It's hard work, but honest work. The kind of life you would have liked, Thomas. The wind moved through the trees, carrying the scent of late summer. Emma, there's a garden. I'm growing vegetables and flowers, and there are apple trees that'll bear fruit in a few years. I think about you every time I pick tomatoes. Michael, there are horses, beautiful ones, the kind you always wanted to ride. Her throat tightened, but she pushed through. I'll never stop loving you, never stop missing you, but I'm choosing to live again, choosing to be happy. I hope, wherever you are, you understand. I hope you want this for me. Silence answered her, but it was a peaceful silence. Elena touched each headstone gently, then turned and walked back to where Caleb waited. Ready to go home? He asked. Home. Not back, not away. Home. Yes, Elena said. I'm ready. They traveled back to Montana with Elena noticeably changed. The weight she'd been carrying had lifted, replaced by a quiet certainty that Caleb recognized and respected. She talked more freely about her past now, no longer treating it as a shameful secret, but simply as history that had shaped her into who she'd become. When they finally returned to Ridgewater Ranch in late September, Cole greeted them with a grin. Place didn't fall apart without you, though Danny missed Elena's cooking something fierce. I missed making it, Elena admitted, surprised by how true that was. That evening, she and Caleb sat on the porch watching the sun set over the ranch. The cattle were fat from summer grazing. The garden had produced more than they'd dreamed. The small apple trees stood healthy and strong, preparing for their first winter. Harvest time, Caleb said quietly. Not quite. There's still work to do. There's always work to do. That's ranch life. He turned to look at her. But I meant what I said before we left. I've already bet my future on you. The question is whether you're ready to bet yours on me. Elena took his hand, threading their fingers together. I went back to Colorado convinced I'd fall apart, convinced seeing that place would destroy all the progress I'd made. But it didn't. I stood where my family died, and I didn't shatter. I found peace instead. And I realized something. I've been waiting for permission to be happy, waiting for some sign that I'd suffered enough, done enough penance, earned the right to move forward. She met his gaze. But that's not how it works. There's no cosmic scoreboard, just choices. And I'm choosing this, choosing you, choosing the future we're building together. Caleb's expression transformed, hope and love and relief flooding his features. Is that a yes? That's a yes. Elena smiled, feeling something tight in her chest finally release. Ask me properly. He stood, pulling her to her feet, and took both her hands in his. Elena Ward, you're the strongest, bravest, most remarkable woman I've ever known. You've transformed this ranch from a place I was just surviving into a home I wake up grateful for every morning. You've made me believe in futures again. Will you marry me? Will you build this life officially, permanently, as my partner in everything? Yes, Elena said, and the word felt like freedom. Yes to all of it. Caleb kissed her then, deep and thorough and full of promise. When they finally pulled apart, both were grinning like fools. When? He asked. Soon, before winter sets in. Something simple, just the people who matter. She paused. And Caleb? I don't want to be someone you rescued or a project you fixed. I want to be your equal partner. You already are. You have been since the day you stopped running and chose to stay. They stood together on that porch, two people who'd survived the worst and chosen to build something beautiful from the wreckage. The frontier spread before them, endless and harsh and full of possibility. Their story wasn't a fairy tale. It was better than that. It was real, earned through hard work and honest vulnerability and the courage to keep trying even when every instinct screamed to protect yourself by retreating. Elena Ward, who had arrived at Ridgewater Ranch with nothing but a battered suitcase and a past she couldn't escape, had finally found what she'd been searching for without even knowing it. Not just a place to hide, not just survival, but a home, a partner, and a future worth fighting for. The weeks that followed their engagement carried a momentum that swept through Ridgewater Ranch like a revitalizing wind. News of the upcoming wedding spread quickly through the small frontier community, and Elena found herself the recipient of unexpected kindness. Rosa brought fabric she'd been saving, insisting Elena use it for a wedding dress. Mrs. Peterson arrived one afternoon with her daughter, offering to help with the sewing. Even the ranch hands got involved, with Cole organizing repairs to the ranch house and Danny enthusiastically volunteering to build whatever was needed for the ceremony. "Just tell me what you want," the young man said eagerly. "An arch? Benches? I can build anything." Elena, who had imagined something quiet and private, found herself swept up in the community's genuine excitement. It was strange and wonderful to be celebrated rather than pitied, to have people invest in her happiness rather than whisper about her tragedy. But not everyone was pleased with the news. Catherine's letter arrived in early October, delivered by the same mail rider who'd brought the legal correspondence from Colorado. Caleb read it standing in the ranch yard, his expression darkening with each line. "What does she say?" Elena asked, though she could guess. "She's appalled that I'm marrying so far beneath my station. She questions your motives and suggests you're after whatever money you think I have." His voice was tight with anger. "She's threatening to contest my father's will on the grounds that I'm mentally unfit to manage my inheritance." Elena's stomach dropped. Can she do that? She can try. Won't succeed. My father's will was ironclad, and I'm demonstrably sane, but she can make things difficult and expensive. Caleb crumpled the letter in his fist. "She's also informed the family that she won't attend Margaret's wedding if I bring you, and she's encouraged them to choose sides." "Maybe you should go alone," Elena said quietly. "To the wedding. Keep peace with your family." Caleb's response was immediate and fierce. "Absolutely not. You're going to be my wife. If they can't accept that, they can go to hell." He saw her expression and softened slightly. "Elena, these people chose comfort and appearances over everything my father valued. Their approval means nothing to me. Your happiness means everything. But if it costs you your inheritance, then it costs me my inheritance. I don't need their money. Never have, never will." He pulled her close. "I need you. That's all that matters." Despite his certainty, Elena felt the old fears creeping back. She was causing problems again, creating division, bringing her damage into Caleb's life in ways that hurt him. The thought kept her awake that night, staring at the ceiling, listening to the house settle around her. She was still awake when she heard Caleb's door open, heard his footsteps in the hallway. A soft knock on her door. "Can't sleep either?" he asked when she opened it. "Too much noise in my head." They went downstairs together, and Caleb built up the fire while Elena made tea. They settled in the parlor, wrapped in blankets against the October chill, and for a while neither spoke. Finally, Caleb broke the silence. "Tell me what you're thinking. The truth." Elena stared into the fire, gathering her thoughts. "I'm thinking that loving me is costing you things. Your family, your inheritance, your connection to your past. And I'm wondering if there'll come a day when you regret that cost. When you look at me and see everything you gave up instead of everything you gained. That's fear talking, not truth. Maybe. But it's still there. This voice that says I'm not worth what you're sacrificing." Caleb set down his tea and turned to face her fully. "Do you remember what my father sacrificed? He gave up wealth, prestige, his family's approval, everything Philadelphia offered. And do you know what he got in return? Your mother. This ranch. A life that mattered, work that meant something, love that was real instead of arranged, the respect of people who valued character over pedigree." His voice was passionate now. My father died relatively young, worked harder than most men ever will, and never had the comfortable life he was born to. And with his last breath, he told me he had no regrets, that choosing authenticity over ease was the best decision he ever made. But I'm not sacrificing anything, Elena. I'm choosing. Choosing you over people who value money more than happiness. Choosing partnership over propriety. Choosing a future I build with my own hands over one handed to me by people who've never understood what actually matters. Elena felt tears threatening. You make it sound simple. It is simple. Not easy, but simple. He took her hand. Here's what I know. My aunt and her opinion? Irrelevant. My father's money? Don't need it. Keeping peace with people who'd rather I be miserable and respectable than happy and unsuitable? Not worth 5 minutes of my time. And if you're wrong, if you wake up in 5 years and realize you made a mistake, Caleb's expression was gentle but absolute. Then I'll have spent 5 years with the woman I love, building something meaningful, living authentically. That's not a mistake. That's a life well lived. He cupped her face in his hands. The only mistake would be letting fear, yours or mine, keep us from this. They sat together as the fire burned low, talking through fears and futures, old wounds and new hopes. By the time dawn began to gray the windows, Elena felt steadier, more certain. The fears hadn't disappeared entirely, but Caleb's unwavering conviction had given her something to anchor to. We should probably sleep, she said, as birds began their morning chorus. Probably. But Caleb didn't move, and neither did she. They dozed on the sofa instead, tangled together in blankets, and that was how Cole found them when he came in for breakfast 2 hours later. Well, the foreman said, his weathered face creasing with amusement, guess I'll make my own coffee this morning. The wedding was set for the last Saturday in October, time to fall between the end of harvest work and before winter made travel impossible. They kept it simple by necessity and by choice, a ceremony in the ranch yard under the cottonwood trees, followed by a meal in the barn that the entire community would help prepare. Elena spent her final days as a single woman in a strange state of surreal calm. She finished preserving the last of the garden harvest, putting up jars of tomatoes and beans and pickles for the winter ahead. She mended clothes and organized the household for the cold months coming. She worked in the garden, putting it to bed for winter, already planning next year's expansion. Rosa and Mrs. Peterson arrived 3 days before the wedding to help with the dress. Elena had chosen simple cream-colored fabric, practical enough to be worn again rather than relegated to a trunk after one use. The women worked in the parlor, their needles flashing in the afternoon light, their conversation comfortable and easy. I never thought I'd do this again, Elena said, watching Rosa pin a hem. Get married, build a life with someone. After Thomas died, I couldn't imagine wanting to. But Caleb's different, Rosa said. It wasn't a question. He's different, I'm different, the whole thing is different. Elena struggled to articulate it. With Thomas, everything was easy. We grew up in the same town, wanted the same simple things, built the life everyone expected. It was good, but it was also unchallenged. Mrs. Peterson looked up from where she was stitching lace. And this? This is earned. Every single day is a choice to stay, to build, to trust. It's harder, but it feels more real somehow. Like I'm not just following a script, but actually creating something. That's what frontier marriage is, Mrs. Peterson said. Choice and partnership and work. Pretty words and fancy dresses don't keep you warm in Montana winter, but shared purpose and genuine respect, that'll see you through anything. The dress came together beautifully. Simple lines, delicate lace at the collar and cuffs, practical enough for ranch life, but special enough for a wedding. When Elena tried it on the evening before the ceremony, Rosa actually teared up. You look like someone who's found her place, she said. And looking in the mirror, Elena realized she did. The haunted, hunted look that had defined her for 5 years was gone. In its place was something stronger, something settled. She looked like a woman who'd survived and come through the other side better for it. The night before the wedding, Caleb knocked on her door after the house had gone quiet. Bad luck to see the bride, Elena said, but she let him in anyway. I don't believe in luck. Just choices. He sat on the edge of her bed, looking unusually nervous. I have something for you. Early wedding present. He handed her a small wooden box, clearly handmade, the wood polished smooth. Inside, nestled in cloth, was a delicate silver locket. "It was my mother's," Caleb said. "The only thing my father kept from his Philadelphia life. He gave it to her when they married, and she wore it until the day she died." He opened it to reveal two tiny portraits. "That's my father as a young man. The other is my mother." Elena studied the faces. A handsome man with Caleb's eyes, a beautiful woman with a determined chin. "Your father looks happy." He was, despite everything he gave up, or maybe because of it. Caleb took the locket, fastening it around Elena's neck. "I want you to have this. Want you to remember that choosing love over convenience, authenticity over ease, it's in this family's blood. You're not taking me away from anything. You're bringing me home to what matters." Elena touched the locket, feeling the weight of history and promise combined. "I'll treasure it." "Good." He kissed her forehead. "Get some sleep. Tomorrow's a big day." But sleep was impossible. Elena lay awake, turning the locket over in her fingers, thinking about the journey that had brought her here, from the ashes of Colorado to this room in Montana, from broken to healing, from running to choosing to stay. She thought about Emma and Michael, and for the first time, that thinking didn't bring crushing guilt. Instead, she imagined them at 7 and 4, imagined what they might say if they could see her now. Emma would approve of the garden, would probably insist on helping plant next spring. Michael would love the horses, would beg to ride every single day. They'd both like Caleb, would trust his quiet strength and gentle humor. "I hope you'd be happy for me," Elena whispered into the darkness. "I hope you'd understand that loving again doesn't mean forgetting you. It means honoring the love you taught me by refusing to let tragedy be the end of my story." The morning of the wedding dawned clear and cold, with frost decorating the grass in delicate patterns that would melt by midday. Elena woke early, as she always did, but for once there was no work waiting. Rosa and Mrs. Peterson had forbidden her from lifting a finger. "This is your day to be fussed over," Rosa declared, appearing at dawn with breakfast on a tray. "We're handling everything else." The hours passed in a strange blur. Rosa styled Elena's hair, weaving in wildflowers they'd picked the day before. Mrs. Peterson helped her into the dress, making final adjustments. Even Danny's sister, who'd arrived the night before, contributed by pinning the locket in place and declaring Elena the prettiest bride Montana had ever seen. Through the window, Elena could see the preparations in the yard. The ranch hands had built a simple arch decorated with late-season flowers and autumn leaves. Chairs and benches had been arranged in neat rows. In the barn, tables were set up for the meal, and she could smell bread baking, meat roasting, pies cooling. The entire community had come together to celebrate something that 6 months ago Elena couldn't have imagined: her happiness. At precisely 3 o'clock, with the autumn sun painting everything gold, Elena stood at the ranch house door. Cole waited to walk her down the makeshift aisle, looking uncomfortable in his best clothes, but pleased to have been asked. "You ready for this?" he asked. Elena looked past him to where Caleb stood under the arch, Miguel and Danny flanking him. He wore his best suit, his hair slicked back, his expression as he watched her approach a mixture of love and awe and absolute certainty. "Yes," Elena said. "I'm ready." They walked together through the assembled guests. The Peterson family, ranch hands from neighboring properties, the shopkeeper from Copper Falls, people Elena had come to know over the past year. People who'd watched her transform from a haunted stranger to a woman claiming her place in their community. When Cole placed her hand in Caleb's, the older man's eyes were suspiciously bright. "Take care of her, boss." "Always," Caleb promised. The minister was a circuit preacher who visited monthly, a practical man who understood frontier life. He kept the ceremony short but meaningful, talking about partnership and resilience, about building something lasting in an unforgiving land. "Marriage on the frontier isn't about romance," he said. "It's about facing hardship together, about choosing each other every day when comfort would be easier, about creating something permanent in a world of impermanence." Elena met Caleb's eyes and saw her own determination reflected there. This was exactly right. Not pretty promises, but honest acknowledgement of the work ahead and the choice to do that work together. When the minister asked if she took Caleb to be her husband, Elena's voice was clear and strong. I do. And when Caleb promised to honor her, to partner with her, to build a life worthy of their efforts, his voice carried the same certainty. I do. The kiss that sealed their marriage was tender and brief, appropriate for the assembled audience, but it carried the weight of everything they'd survived to reach this moment, every fear overcome and every choice made. As they turned to face their guests as husband and wife, the crowd erupted in genuine celebration. Danny whooped loudly. Cole clapped with his weathered hands. Rosa cried happy tears, while Miguel looked on with quiet satisfaction. The party that followed was exactly what frontier celebrations should be. Abundant food, strong drink, laughter that rang across the plains. Someone produced a fiddle, and dancing began in the barn as the sun set. Elena found herself passed from partner to partner, dancing with Frank Peterson, with Miguel, with Danny, who nearly stepped on her feet a dozen times but was so enthusiastic she couldn't help laughing. But the dance that mattered was with Caleb, late in the evening when most of the guests had departed and only close friends remained. They swayed together in the barn's dim interior, exhausted and happy, the future spreading before them like the Montana plains, vast and challenging and full of possibility. Mrs. Mercer, Caleb said, testing the name. How does it feel? Right, Elena said. Terrifying and right. Good combination for a frontier marriage. They danced in silence for a moment, then Elena said, Thank you. For what? For not giving up on me when I was still giving up on myself. For seeing something worth staying for when I'd convinced myself I was only worth leaving. For making me believe I deserved a second chance. Caleb pulled back to look at her. Elena, you didn't need me to deserve a second chance. You earned that through pure courage. I just had the good fortune to be here when you were ready to claim it. The last guest departed near midnight, leaving the newlyweds alone in the ranch house that was now officially their shared home. They climbed the stairs together, and for the first time, Elena entered Caleb's room, their room now, as his wife. Later, wrapped in blankets against the October cold, Caleb traced patterns on her shoulder and asked, Any regrets? Not even one. Elena turned to face him. You? Only that I didn't meet you 10 years ago. We wouldn't have been ready for each other 10 years ago. You were still married to Sarah. I was still married to Thomas. We were different people. True. He considered this. Maybe we had to break before we could build something stronger. Like bone healing after a fracture. The break point becomes the strongest part. They fell asleep tangled together, and for the first time in 5 years, Elena slept without nightmares. When she woke in the pre-dawn darkness, momentarily disoriented, Caleb's steady breathing beside her anchored her immediately. She was home. She was safe. She was exactly where she belonged. The weeks that followed the wedding settled into a new rhythm. Elena moved her belongings into the master bedroom, merging her life with Caleb's in tangible ways. They learned to share space, to navigate the small adjustments that came with true partnership. She discovered he was particular about how coffee was made. He learned she needed quiet mornings before conversation. They figured out sleeping arrangements, morning routines, the 1,000 small details that built a shared life. Winter arrived early that year, with snow falling in mid-November and temperatures dropping fast. But Ridgewater was ready. The cattle were in good pastures with adequate windbreaks. Hay was stocked. The root cellar was full of preserved food. The ranch house had been weatherproofed and reinforced. And this time, facing winter didn't feel like grim endurance. It felt like a challenge they'd meet together. One December evening, as snow fell heavy outside and the fire crackled warm inside, Elena sat at the kitchen table working on accounts. Caleb had insisted she take over the ranch's financial management. Her head for numbers was better than his, and partnership meant utilizing each person's strengths. We're in better shape than I expected, she said, reviewing the ledgers. The calf sales were strong, and we're actually ahead on expenses for the first time in years. Caleb looked up from where he was mending tack. That's your doing. You've cut waste, maximized the garden, and managed resources better than I ever could. Our doing. You made the space for it. She set down her pen. I was thinking about next year. What if we expanded the garden significantly? Sell produce in Copper Falls and to neighboring ranches. Use that income to hire another hand, which would free up time for the horse breeding Miguel's been pushing for. Diversification. Smart. Caleb came to look over her shoulder at her calculations. Think we can manage it? I think together we can manage anything. It was a bold statement, but it proved true. Winter tested them with brutal cold and 2 major storms, but they weathered each challenge. Spring brought the usual chaos of calving and fence repairs and endless work. Summer produced a garden that exceeded all expectations, with Elena selling produce that brought in significant extra income. The horse breeding program began in earnest, with Miguel training young animals that fetched premium prices. They hired a young man named Sam, eager and hardworking, who reminded Elena of Danny when he'd first arrived. And through it all, Elena and Caleb built their partnership deeper. They argued about ranch decisions and learned to compromise. They celebrated small victories and supported each other through setbacks. They built something that wasn't perfect, but was real and lasting and entirely their own. One evening in late summer of their second year together, Elena stood in the garden watching the sun set. The 3 apple trees they'd planted had survived 2 winters and were showing vigorous growth. Another year, maybe 2, and they'd bear fruit. Caleb joined her, slipping an arm around her waist. Thinking about the future? Thinking about how much has changed. 2 years ago, I was terrified to even imagine a future. Now, I can't stop planning for it. Like what? Like expanding the orchard. Like building a greenhouse so we can extend the growing season. Like maybe... She paused, the thought still new and fragile. Like maybe not being afraid anymore if I get pregnant. Caleb went still. You've been thinking about children? Lately, yes. I never thought I'd want that again. Never thought I could survive the fear of loving someone I could lose. She turned to face him. But I keep imagining a child growing up here, learning the land, helping with the work, building the future with us. And it doesn't terrify me the way it used to. Elena. His voice was thick with emotion. I'd love that. But only if you're truly ready. There's no pressure. I know. That's why I can imagine it now. Because you've never pressured me, never demanded more than I could give. She took his hand, placing it over her heart. I'm not saying I'm ready tomorrow, but someday, when the fear is smaller than the hope. They stood together in the garden as the stars began to appear. 2 people who'd been shattered by loss but had built something beautiful from the pieces. The frontier stretched around them, harsh and unforgiving and absolutely magnificent in its raw possibility. 3 years into their marriage, Elena woke one spring morning with a certainty that made her breath catch. She'd suspected for weeks but had been afraid to hope. Now, watching Caleb sleep beside her in the early dawn light, she knew. She was pregnant. Terror and joy warred in her chest. All the old fears surged up. What if something went wrong? What if she lost this child? What if history repeated itself? But beneath the fear was something stronger. Trust in her own resilience, trust in Caleb's support, trust that even if the worst happened, she'd survive it because she wasn't alone anymore. When Caleb woke, she told him immediately. His reaction was everything she needed. Joy tempered with understanding of her fear, excitement balanced with sensitivity to her trauma. He held her close and promised they'd face whatever came together, and she believed him. The pregnancy was difficult. Elena's body, older now and marked by past trauma, struggled with the demands. There were complications, scary moments, days when fear threatened to overwhelm her. But the community rallied. Rosa visited daily. Mrs. Peterson shared wisdom from raising 6 children. Even Cole became unexpectedly gentle, taking on extra work without being asked so Elena could rest. And Caleb was a constant, steady presence. He held her during panic attacks, talked her through fears, celebrated every small milestone. When Elena was put on bed rest for the final 2 months, he never complained about the extra work, just rearranged everything to ensure she was safe and cared for. Their daughter was born in early October, 4 years to the month after Elena had first arrived at Ridgewater Ranch. The labor was long and terrifying, bringing back memories of everything Elena had lost. But when the midwife finally placed the squalling infant in her arms, Elena looked down at her daughter's red, furious face and felt something she'd thought impossible. Pure, uncomplicated joy. She's perfect, Caleb said, his voice breaking. Absolutely perfect. They named her Sarah Ellen, Sarah for Caleb's first wife, honoring the woman who'd come before, and Ellen for Elena's mother, connecting past and present. It felt right to acknowledge all the love and loss that had brought them to this moment. Being a mother again was both harder and easier than Elena expected. The fear never fully disappeared. She found herself checking Sarah's breathing multiple times a night, panicking at every small cough or cry. But Caleb was patient with her anxiety, and slowly Elena learned to trust again. Trust that this child would live, that happiness didn't have to be followed by tragedy, that she was allowed to have this. Sarah thrived. She was a frontier baby through and through, tough, adaptable, growing strong on ranch life and mountain air. By her first birthday, she was toddling around the ranch yard, fascinated by everything. By 2, she was helping Elena in the garden, more hindrance than help, but utterly committed. And Elena, watching her daughter grow, found the grief for Emma and Michael shifting. It never disappeared. Those children would always be part of her heart. But loving Sarah didn't diminish that love. It existed alongside it, proof that the human heart could hold both sorrow and joy, loss and hope, past and future. 5 years after their wedding, Elena stood in the orchard behind the ranch house. The apple trees had finally borne fruit, not much, but enough to make pies and sauce, with the promise of more to come. Sarah played nearby, building elaborate structures with fallen apples that she insisted were castles for imaginary princesses. Caleb found them there, fresh from working with the horses. Miguel had proven right about the breeding program. They now had a reputation for quality horses that brought buyers from 3 territories. "Good day?" Elena asked, accepting his kiss. "Sold 2 yearlings for twice what we expected. Miguel's already planning which mares to breed next." He scooped up Sarah, who shrieked with delight. "And how are my girls?" "We're building a kingdom," Sarah announced seriously, "with apple castles and flower gardens and horses everywhere." "Sounds perfect." Caleb set her down, and she immediately returned to her construction project. Elena and Caleb stood together, watching their daughter play in the orchard they'd planted, on the land they'd built together, surrounded by the life they'd created through sheer determination and courage. "Sometimes I still can't believe this is real," Elena said quietly, "that I get to have this. All of this." "Believe it. You earned every bit of it." Caleb pulled her close. "You know what the best part is?" "What?" "This is just the beginning. Sarah's got 60, 70 years ahead of her. She'll grow up strong and capable, probably take over the ranch someday, build her own life here. And we'll get to watch it all unfold." Elena thought about that, about grandchildren running through these orchards, about the ranch continuing long after they were gone, about their daughter's daughter tending these trees and telling stories about the grandmother who'd planted them after losing everything. It was a kind of immortality, she realized, not in monuments or wealth, but in the simple act of building something that would outlast you, in teaching the next generation to be brave and resilient and willing to choose love even after loss. "I used to think my story ended in that fire," Elena said, "that everything after was just epilogue, just running out the clock until it was finally over. And now? Now, I think that was just the first chapter, the part that taught me what I was made of, what I could survive, what I was capable of becoming." She looked up at Caleb. "The real story started when I stopped running and chose to build, when I decided broken things could be made whole. When I found you." They kissed long and sweet, while Sarah sang nonsense songs to her apple castles, and the Montana wind moved through the trees that would bear fruit for generations. 10 years after Elena first arrived at Ridgewater Ranch, the place had transformed completely. The main house had been expanded and improved. The garden was now nearly 2 acres, producing enough to sell throughout the territory. The horse program was thriving. They'd hired 3 more hands to manage it all, and the ranch was prosperous in ways Caleb had once only dreamed. But the real transformation was internal. Elena had gone from a woman so shattered she could barely speak of her past to someone who told Sarah stories about Emma and Michael without flinching. She spoke at community gatherings about resilience and hope. She mentored other women who'd suffered losses, offering the kind of understanding that only someone who'd survived could provide. And Caleb, who'd spent 7 years convinced his capacity for happiness had died with Sarah and their unborn son, had discovered he could build something even stronger the second time around. Not because the love was greater, love didn't work that way, but because he'd learned how precious it was, how fragile, how worth fighting for. On their 10th anniversary, they stood on the ridge overlooking Ridgewater Ranch. Sarah, now 6, played nearby with the Peterson children who'd come for the celebration. Below, the ranch sprawled across the valley, buildings solid and well-maintained, cattle dotting the pastures, horses grazing in paddocks, gardens green and abundant. "You ever regret it?" Elena asked. "Choosing this life? Choosing me?" Caleb didn't even hesitate. "Not for 1 second. Every choice that brought me here, every hardship we survived, every fear we overcame, I'd do it all again in a heartbeat." "Even losing Sarah?" It was a bold question, but after 10 years of marriage, they could ask the hard things. Caleb was quiet for a moment, considering. "I'll always grieve her, always wonder about the life we might have had. But I can't regret something that led me to you, to Sarah Ellen, to this." He gestured at the ranch. "Loss changed me, made me capable of appreciating what I have now in ways I couldn't have before. That doesn't make the loss good, but it made me better." Elena understood completely. She carried Emma and Michael in her heart every day, but she'd learned that loving them didn't mean she couldn't also love the life she'd built after losing them. Grief and joy weren't mutually exclusive. They were both part of being fully human. "I love you," she said, "for giving me a reason to stop running, for showing me that broken things can heal, for building this beautiful, impossible life with me. I love you too, for being brave enough to stay when every instinct told you to run, for transforming this ranch from a job site into a home, for giving me a future I actually want to wake up to." They kissed while Sarah made disgusted noises and the Peterson children laughed. Below, the ranch continued its work, cattle grazing, horses running, gardens growing. The frontier stretched endlessly in all directions, beautiful and harsh and utterly unforgiving. But Elena Ward Mercer, who had once arrived at this place with nothing but a battered suitcase and more grief than one person should have to carry, had proven something essential about the human spirit. That we're capable of more resilience than we imagine. That love can grow in the aftermath of loss. That choosing courage over fear, again and again, can transform not just a life, but a legacy. The sun set over Ridgewater Ranch, painting everything in gold and amber, and Elena realized she'd finally stopped waiting for disaster. Stopped bracing for the other shoe to drop. Stopped believing that happiness was temporary and tragedy inevitable. She'd learned to simply live, to appreciate each day as it came, to build for the future while honoring the past, to be both scarred and whole, both grieving and joyful, both broken and healed. And standing there on that ridge with Caleb's arm around her waist, their daughter's laughter ringing across the plains, and the ranch they'd built together spreading below them like a promise kept, Elena Ward Mercer was finally, completely home. The frontier had tested her, life had broken her, but she'd survived it all and emerged not just intact, but transformed. She'd chosen love after loss, hope after despair, building after destruction. She'd proven that the worst moments of your life don't have to define all the moments that follow. And that was the greatest victory of all. Not that she'd escaped tragedy, she hadn't, but that she'd faced it, survived it, and refused to let it be the end of her story. She'd written new chapters, built new dreams, created new joy from the ashes of old sorrow. As darkness fell and stars began to appear in the vast Montana sky, the Mercer family walked back down to their ranch house together. Inside, lamps glowed warm and welcoming. Tomorrow would bring more work, more challenges, more opportunities to choose courage over fear. But tonight, they were simply home. And that was enough. That was everything.